Chapter 405. Not only did the little skull have intelligence, but he'd also become more sinister and ruthless. This really made Han Shu not know if he should be happy or sad. However, what Han Shu could confirm was that the current little skull would be able to live a better life in the netherworld. In that world that was filled with slaughter and invasion everywhere, he should be able to be at ease like this. With the death of the head of the House of Menlo, Florida's willpower that had persisted until now finally collapsed. He no longer dared to continue staying in the air. Florida recklessly shouted for a retreat and flew towards Loratan and the others. "Heh, you still want to escape this time?" Han Shu's cold laughter suddenly rang out. With an order, Dark Dragon Gilbert, Hydra Lania, and Little Skull abruptly gathered at Han Shu's side from all four directions, charging towards Florida together. There were still 20 or so experts from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band surrounding Florida. Once Florida and Loratan converged, it would be extremely difficult to kill him. This time, Han Shu was determined to get rid of Florida, so as not to leave behind endless troubles for Trunks. When Han Shu had charged towards Florida alone, the experts protecting Florida had disregarded everything to attack Han Shu. Although Han Shu had beheaded a few experts along the way, he still wasn't able to get rid of Florida as he wished. However, with the addition of 2 super-rank magical beasts and the little skull, those experts surrounding Florida were no longer a threat. Han Shu only needed to keep an eye on Florida, the rest would naturally be taken care of by Little Skull and the others. Rain of fire, icicles, wind blades, lightning, and all sorts of other magic attacks rained down on Han Shu and the others. Because of the appearance of this wave of magic, the dusky sky suddenly became gorgeous, as if a beautiful firework had blossomed. Han Shu mobilized his magical yuan, and a protective barrier as thin as a cicada's wing wrapped around his body. On the outside, a huge white bone shield with malevolent bone spikes burst out. Most of the magic was blocked by the white bone shield. Dark Dragon Gilbert and Hydra Lania took the opportunity to spit out acid poison and torrential rain attacks. Han Shu weaved and dodged in the air with the black protective barrier around him, arriving in front of Florida after a few quick twists and turns. A concentrated wave of bone spears suddenly shot out from Han Shu's side with a shrill whistle. Florida's group, who were defending against Dark Dragon Gilbert and Hydra Lania's attacks, appeared to be even more flustered. At this moment, the demon's lair edge in Han Shu's hand once again disappeared without a sound, gradually closing in on Florida from a direction that couldn't be seen. Little Skull, who was riding on the bone demon, had unknowingly appeared behind Florida and the others. He majestically raised his 3-meter-long bone spear, thrusting it towards Florida and the others who had suddenly reacted. The dense aura of death brought with it a desolation and coldness never seen in this world. Behind! Florida's reaction was still relatively quick among this group of people. Once he sensed the violent wind behind him, he immediately realized the danger behind him. Previously, when Little Skull killed Adam Menlo, because Han Shu had been staring at him in astonishment, Florida and the others who weren't violently attacked by Han Shu also had the leisure to watch the entire process. Little Skull, who was able to kill Adam Menlo, who was riding on the golden-winged rock, was no less dangerous to Florida than Han Shu. Therefore, when he saw Little Skull charging over from behind, he immediately shouted. At this point, Florida's side obviously didn't have enough manpower. On both sides were the attacks of Dark Dragon Gilbert and Hydra Lania. In front of them was the overbearing Han Shu, and behind them was suddenly an otherworldly expert. He could control one side, but not the other. Facing these waves of attacks that descended at the same time, Florida suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. He looked at Han Shu, who was charging over with a sneer, and suddenly discovered that the weapon in Han Shu's hand had disappeared. Florida was immediately scared out of his wits, coming to a sudden realization. Unfortunately, his realization was still a bit too late. The group of experts who were distracted by Little Skull and the other 2 didn't have the time to pay attention to Florida. When they suddenly heard a loud whistle, they already understood that the situation was far from good. Florida, who had exerted his utmost effort to support the light and lightning defensive spells, still couldn't stop the demon's lair edge from taking his life. The lightning and light magic barriers scattered like broken glass. The demon's lair edge blasted through Florida's defensive barrier and pierced through Florida's neck, opening a bloody hole in the center of his neck. The hatred in Florida's eyes gradually faded. Without the support of mental strength, Florida's body fell in a straight line. The leader of one of the four major powers in the Valley of Sunshine had finally died in the hands of Han Shuo. When the experts of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band who had surrounded Florida saw that Han Shuo had seized the opportunity to kill Florida, despair and helplessness rose in their hearts. At this moment, the attacks of Little Skull, Gilbert, and the others rained down like a torrential rain, taking away another 10 lives in an instant. With Florida's death, the first wave of experts that had come to attack this time no longer had a leader. The remaining few dozen experts began to retreat with all their might, but were continuously killed by Han Shuo and the others along the way. Another 20 or so people had been killed before they could reach Loritin's side. Of the 300 experts that had gone up, along with many flying magical creatures, only 19 people and 11 magical creatures made it back to Loritin's side. Florida and Adam Menlo of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band had forever disappeared from the stage of the Valley of Sunshine's struggle for supremacy. "Ha, Loritin, it's been a while!" Han Shuo stood proudly in midair and greeted Loritin in a mocking manner. On either side of Han Shuo were the 2 super-rank magical creatures and Little Skull. Several hundred gargoyles were like guards, silently flapping their wings behind Han Shuo. Having calculated his altitude, Han Shuo wasn't afraid of the arrows from below. Loritin raised his head to look at the sky and saw Han Shuo looking at him mockingly. All sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. Beside Loritin were the corpses of Florida and Adam Menlo. Loritin should have been happy that 2 of the leaders of the 3 great powers had died, but when he looked at Han Shuo, he felt a sense of panic. "It has indeed been a long time. I should have known that you would come. Apart from you, Trunks didn't have any other tricks up his sleeve." Loritin first sighed, then took a deep breath. He looked at Han Shuo and said in a low voice, "Now that things have come to this, there's nothing more to say. Indeed, I was the one who captured Trunks, but I don't regret it." With the current situation in the Valley of Sunshine, if Loritin didn't act against Trunks, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band would sooner or later replace the Cairo mercenary band's position in the Valley of Sunshine. This could be seen from Trunks' continuous expansion. As the leader of the Cairo mercenary band, Loritin naturally had to think of his subordinates. There was nothing wrong with his actions. Indeed, there's nothing more to say. From today onwards, the Cairo mercenary band will be my mortal enemy. Loritin, you're on your own. Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Loritin. He glanced at Florida and Adam Menlo's corpses one last time before returning to the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. These powers had paid a painful price in the first wave of attacks. Not only had they lost their most elite experts, even Florida and Adam Menlo had been killed. In this way, this group that had banded together because of benefits would be helpless against the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Humans were always selfish. With the deaths of Florida and Adam Menlo, Han Shuo was almost certain that the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and Adam Menlo's family would immediately fall into chaos. Especially Florida's Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, it would inevitably fall into a situation of being seized or divided. In this way, this group's threat to the Soul Destroyer mercenary band would be greatly reduced. Han Shuo only needed to sit back and watch them fall apart. That was why he had left so confidently. Reality had indeed developed according to Han Shuo's expectations. When Han Shuo left, the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Menlo immediately fell into a quarrel. The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, in particular, had immediately split into a few small powers after Florida's death. Only a small portion held the intention of avenging Florida, while the majority of the remaining people advocated leaving this troublesome place as soon as possible. The House of Menlo was slightly better. After all, Adam Menlo was their elder. The House of Menlo, whose authority was mainly concentrated in the hands of their relatives, was crying out in grief that they would first avenge Adam Menlo before deciding what to do next. The sudden quarrel had disrupted Loreton's thoughts. Looking at the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band preparing to retreat, as well as the frightened leaders of the small powers, Loreton suddenly felt a sense of helplessness. With so many flying creatures killed, it was completely impossible to rely on flying creatures to enter the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. With the existence of the Space Ring, it was impossible for Loreton to exhaust the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to death. The only way was to forcefully enter. However, the price they would have to pay for such a forceful attack was simply not something they could accept. For a moment, Loreton didn't have any confidence in victory. Looking at the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Menlo arguing endlessly, he suddenly felt somewhat helpless. "Leader, should we take this opportunity to eliminate both of them first?" Just as Loreton was feeling vexed, Harris suddenly moved closer and lowered his voice as he suggested maliciously. Glancing at Harris, Loreton looked in the direction Hans Shaw had left in and smiled wryly. "That fellow can't wait for us to do that. If we were to fight with both of them now, then it would really be to his liking. When our three sides are almost exhausted, the master of the Valley of Sunshine will really be the Soul Destroyer mercenary band." Harris stared blankly for a moment, mulling over Lawrence's words for a while before nodding and saying, "Leader is still far-sighted. However, now that Florida and Adam Menlo are dead, we have two fewer enemies. The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Menlo are no longer a threat." "That's true. It's a pity that after this battle, if we can't destroy the Soul Destroyer mercenary band, their reputation will greatly increase. In the future, apart from our Cairo mercenary band, there will no longer be any power that can shake their position." "I don't know if this is a blessing or a curse," Loreton said with a headache. Just as Loreton and Harris were discussing in low voices, the leaders of the small mercenary bands walked over together. One of them looked at Loreton with a gloomy face and said, "Leader Loreton, at this point, I think we no longer have the chance to destroy the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. If the Cairo mercenary band wants us to be the vanguard and throw our lives away, then I'm sorry, but we're not willing to sacrifice the lives of all our brothers for the benefits you've given us. Since things have come to this, I think we should disperse. Yeah, that place is too hard to attack. Without flying magic beasts, we have no chance of victory." Another leader of a small mercenary band also shouted. It seemed that it wasn't just one or two people who had this kind of thought. These fellows had walked over together, and all of them were probably planning to leave. A bunch of short-sighted fellows. Loreton came to a conclusion about them in his heart. After a moment of silence, he opened his mouth and said, "Think it over carefully. If we can't destroy the Soul Destroyer mercenary band this time, then I'm afraid that all the teams that participated in attacking them today will suffer a calamity. Our Cairo mercenary band has sufficient strength and isn't afraid of Trunk's revenge. As for you guys, that might be troublesome. There's no need for Leader Loreton to remind us of this. We've naturally thought of it as well," that person replied. "Then do as you wish. In any case, I've already reminded you guys. When Trunks comes looking for you for revenge, don't come looking for me." Loreton snorted coldly, feeling that it was beneath him to say anything more to them. These people looked at each other and simultaneously bade farewell to Loreton. They brought their brothers and left this troublesome place. The majority of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band didn't give Loreton any face after Florida's death. They didn't even bid farewell to Loreton and directly left this place. Of the 6,000 people that had come to attack the Soul Destroyer mercenary band, only 3,000 remained. Without flying magic beasts, if they wanted to attack the Soul Destroyer mercenary band's location, it was no longer a matter of how many people they would lose. Instead, it was a matter of whether they could attack after suffering heavy losses. Chapter 406. When Han Sho returned to the Soul Destroyer mercenary band, he discovered that Trunks was sitting in the middle of the arena with Grant's support. He was currently looking up at the vast expanse of whiteness in the sky. Trunks was still very weak. Although the wounds on his body had been treated, it would take at least 10 days to half a month to recover. The most serious injuries were the tendons in his arms and legs that had been cut off. It would take about a month to reconnect them and restore their previous tenacity. It was obvious that Trunks was worried about the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Due to the tendons in his arms and legs being cut off, he could only sit there limply like a disabled person, unable to move his limbs. Fortunately, his eyes had gradually regained their luster. When he gazed up at the sky, his eyes seemed to be in deep thought. This meant that although his body had suffered heavy injuries, his mental state was still pretty good. "Why did you come out? It's best for you to obediently stay inside and recuperate. Don't worry, the invaders have already returned in low spirits. Loratan will definitely not be able to do anything in the short term." Han Shaw landed beside Trunks and rebuked him. "It's all right, I feel a little better now. Hee, when the Soul Destroyer mercenary band is at its most critical moment, I'm not willing to hide inside and bitterly wait for news from others," Trunks said with a smile. He paused and slightly furrowed his brows. "Brian, is Florida already dead?" Nodding his head, Han Shaw replied, "That's right. I know you wanted to kill him personally. However, Florida's death at this time was much more beneficial to us. With his death, the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band immediately fell apart, greatly reducing the number of our enemies. Therefore, I didn't let him go." Trunks sighed and said ruefully, "AI, it's a pity that I didn't finish him off personally. However, this kind of early death is indeed beneficial to us. If I had killed him earlier, then so many messy matters wouldn't have happened. It seems that this is all my fault. Apart from Florida, there's also Adam Menlo. These two are the pillars of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Menlo. Their deaths have a huge impact on these two powers. Currently, including Loratan's forces, there are still 3,000 people in the vicinity. However, I think they will leave very soon," Han Shaw explained to Trunks. "You don't have to worry about the rest. I know you have a lot of things to do. Leave Loretta to me. I'll take care of her," Trunks said. "It's just Loratan. I can take care of him in passing. It won't take up too much of my time." Han Shaw looked at Trunks in astonishment. With his current injuries, he definitely wouldn't be able to fight you in the short term. Han Shaw was a little worried. "Brian, the Valley of Sunshine has its own rules. If I want to convince others, I can't completely rely on your strength. Only by taking out the Cairo mercenary band and Loratan can I rightfully take control of the Valley of Sunshine and win the respect of others." Trunks' face was still quite weak as he spoke resolutely. Han Shaw was stunned. He hesitated for a moment and said, "But your body, don't worry. I won't immediately deal with Loratan. Just as you said, with Loratan's personality, he wouldn't dare attack this place without complete confidence. Now that the House of Menlo's flying creatures have been killed by you, they definitely won't dare to attack in the short term. We still have Gilbert here. As time passes, they'll definitely give up. Don't worry, after the previous pain, I won't be careless again. I'm confident that I can eradicate Loratan and the Cairo mercenary band," Loratan said. Trunks looked very confident. After experiencing a cruel torture, there seemed to be something new in Trunks' body. Han Shaw looked deeply at Trunks a few times after hearing his words. He was silent for a while before smiling. "Since you're so insistent, then I won't bother with the Valley of Sunshine anymore. However, if you encounter any difficulties, you must inform me as soon as possible. Don't worry, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band doesn't belong to me alone. I know what to do," Trunks replied with a smile. "Gilbert, you stay here and take good care of Trunks before he recovers." Han Shaw looked at Gilbert and instructed. "Understood, honored master." Gilbert guaranteed. Since Trunks wanted to sit firmly on the throne of power in the Valley of Sunshine with his own abilities, he indeed couldn't rely on others for everything. Only by using the strength in his hands to eliminate the Cairo mercenary band, the most powerful force in the Valley of Sunshine, would he be able to truly obtain everyone's respect. Han Sho was surprised and also very appreciative that Trunks could have such thoughts and understanding. This meant that Trunks was indeed a talent. In addition, after saving Trunks this time, Han Sho could see that Trunks had changed. He discovered that Trunks had become more resolute and ruthless, no longer neglecting or being merciful. The lesson from last time had been too cruel. Trunks had experienced torment worse than death. Now, he no longer cared about any difficulties. Han Sho saw this and suddenly understood that Trunks had asked Han Sho to leave Loritin to him. Apart from using Loritin to sharpen his methods, Trunks also needed to use Loritin to hone his martial skills. In the entire Valley of Sunshine, only Loritin was worthy of fighting him. If Han Sho killed Loritin here, Trunks would lose his best opponent. Not only would he lose a lot of fun, he would also lose a turning point to break through. Only through Loritin would he be able to improve once again. After understanding Han Sho's thoughts, Han Sho didn't insist on his own opinion and truly let go of the matters in the Valley of Sunshine. He bid farewell to Trunks and Gilbert on the same day and returned to the Cemetery of Death from the Valley of Sunshine. When he arrived at the Cemetery of Death, Han Sho followed his original purpose of exploring the lower levels. The reason why he had returned to the Cemetery of Death through the transportation matrix this time was because of Wolf's words. If it wasn't for Gilbert's sudden urgent message, Han Sho would have long since explored the third layer of the Cemetery of Death. Now that he had returned, Han Sho didn't forget his proper business and went straight to the bottom of the Cemetery of Death. With his previous experiences, Han Sho once again explored the Cemetery of Death with ease. Under the infusion of Han Sho's mental strength, he easily broke through the boundaries of the upper two layers. Han Sho only stopped when he sensed the existence of the boundary at the entrance of the passageway leading to the third layer. Taking a deep breath, Han Sho slowly condensed his mental strength and explored the area where the boundary existed. Boom! As soon as Han Sho's mental strength touched that area, his brain suddenly shook. A huge force suddenly surged over, squeezing into Han Sho's brain like thousands of little snakes, giving Han Sho an endless numbing pain. Fortunately, Han Sho was already experienced. He hastily held his breath and concentrated, using an even stronger mental strength to blast it in an attempt to break through the boundary like the previous 2 times. The 3-colored light of the skeletal staff in his hand shone brightly. Bam! Han Sho suddenly rammed into it, but the boundary didn't break. Instead, it was Han Sho himself who was bounced back. Just as Han Sho was overwhelmed with shock, the power that had squeezed into Han Sho's brain like thousands of little snakes suddenly went from chaotic to orderly, combining into rays of bright magical symbols. Han Sho, who had studied necromancy magic for a long time, was greatly astonished when the magical symbols appeared in his brain. Immediately afterwards, the 3-colored light of the skeletal staff in his hand suddenly grew brighter. 3 strands of demonic light slowly drilled into Han Sho's body through his arm. The 3-colored light flowed from the skeletal staff to Han Sho's arm and flowed into Han Sho's brain. When the light that matched the thousands of magical rays converged, they arranged themselves into paragraphs of incantations and messages that Han Sho could understand. Han Sho only stared blankly for a moment before coming to a sudden realization. He hastily concentrated and forcibly memorized the messages that appeared in his brain. The paragraphs of incantations and messages were quickly imprinted into his brain. This process didn't take too long. With the development of Han Sho's brain, he very quickly memorized the messages in his brain. If I don't become a sacred magus necromancer, the next layer of the boundary cannot be opened. Inside lies the secret of necromancers becoming gods. The skeletal staff has 3 basic functions. Apart from the first function of doubling the power of magic, the other 2 functions require the coordination of incantations. The incantations are the enchantment of fear, enchantment of weakness, and enchantment of aging. The incantations and methods of using these 3 enchantments are: the magical symbols rotated in Han Sho's brain and finally formed these 3 pieces of information. The first was that the sacred magus was unable to enter the next layer. The second was the incantations for the skeletal staff to return one's youth and travel through the netherworld. The last one was actually the long-lost enchantment of fear, weakness, and aging for necromancers. The next layer actually contained the secret of necromancers becoming gods. Han Sho was greatly alarmed. He looked at the front that was only separated by a layer of boundary, and was stunned by the information in his brain. He stood there in a daze for a long time, his mind in a mess of too many thoughts. After a long time, Han Sho finally calmed his chaotic emotions. He thought to himself that the first piece of information was still illusory to him. It was the second and third pieces of information that were of great use to him at present. Among the 3 miraculous abilities of the skeletal staff, the ability to multiply the power of magic didn't require the coordination of other incantations. However, the miraculous ability to return one's youth and allow one's soul to freely travel through the netherworld weren't so simple to realize. Among them, traveling through the netherworld required the coordination of complicated magical incantations, as well as a precise understanding of one's own soul. In order to successfully realize the miraculous ability to return one's youth, one needed to make use of the energy contained within the skeletal staff. This energy wasn't something that everyone could receive. Only those who were recognized by the skeletal staff would be able to make use of the energy contained within the skeletal staff. Previously, Wolf obviously fulfilled this condition. According to what Wolf said, the followers of the Calamity Church all seemed to meet the requirements to be transformed by the skeletal staff. Those old fellows of the Calamity Church who had lived for God knows how many years would be able to use this energy to regain their youth. The boundary of fear, boundary of weakness, and boundary of aging were the 3 large-scale magical boundaries of necromancers in the legends. Enemies who were enveloped by the boundary of fear would feel fear in their hearts. Their judgment and willpower would be greatly affected by the boundary of fear, causing them to greatly decline. As for the boundary of weakness, it could cause the enemy's physical strength to drain away, greatly reducing their battle strength. The most frightening was the boundary of aging. However, this boundary of aging could only be used by a sacred magus necromancer. Necromancers who had reached the rank of sacred magus necromancer already had a very profound understanding of the soul. Once they used their enormous mental strength to cast the boundary of aging, any living being that entered it would accelerate the process of aging. If the living being stayed in the boundary of aging for a certain period of time, the living being would directly die of old age. This was an extremely frightening and malicious magic. What it reduced was the most fundamental life force in the depths of the living being's soul. No matter how powerful the other party was, if they didn't have a high enough understanding of the soul, they would be powerless in this boundary of aging. Among them, Han Sho could practice the boundary of fear and the boundary of weakness right now. If these 2 types of boundaries were used together, they would have a stacking effect. When used together with the undead army of necromancers in a large-scale battle, it would simply be the nightmare of any army. Perhaps it was because the power of these 2 boundaries was too frightening when used together with the undead army that they were eliminated by all the magic associations on the continent during the glorious era of necromancers. From then on, these 3 boundaries would forever disappear from the magic stage. The boundary of aging could only be practiced by a sacred magus. Perhaps it was because the power of the boundary of aging was too frightening that Han Sho couldn't stack it with the boundary of fear and the boundary of weakness. No matter how powerful a living being was, once they fell into the boundary of aging, their body would rapidly age if they didn't immediately leave. Even if they immediately left the boundary of aging, their body would still be affected and age, a part of it would never be able to recover. However, the skeletal staff in Han Sho's hands could restore the youth of those who aged within the boundary of aging. This boundary of aging could be considered as an orderly combination with the skeletal staff in Han Sho's hands. It could often allow one's own people to enter the boundary of aging to intercept the enemy. After the enemy was defeated and died of old age, one could then use the skeletal staff to restore the youth lost in the boundary of aging. The 3 major boundaries were the secret that necromancers had dominated the continent for many years. At this moment, the cultivation method and incantations were all imprinted into Han Sho's mind. Chapter 407. Before becoming a sacred magus necromancer, it was impossible to enter the next floor. After Han Shuo received this information, he didn't rashly charge in and retreated back the way he came. A few magic incantations and cultivation methods were all imprinted in Han Shuo's mind. However, if he wanted to successfully cultivate them all, it wouldn't be an easy matter. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't continue to stay in the cemetery of death. He once again used the transportation matrix to return to his own mansion in Asan City. After leaving Asan City for a few days, Han Shuo returned to his own mansion and learned of some of the matters that had happened in Asan City from Steward Kalos. His Majesty King Uhtred had already made his stance clear these few days. He was determined to support his illegitimate son, Lawrence, to ascend to the throne. For a moment, the entire Lancelot Empire was shocked. No one could understand why Uhtred would make such a decision. The Dark Mantle organization, which had always been Uhtred's dark hand, suddenly had a close relationship with Lawrence. Some people had already guessed that the Dark Mantle was leaning towards Lawrence. The Empire's legendary Sacred Sword Master Carol's attitude was no longer ambiguous. He finally officially announced that he would support Lawrence to ascend to the throne. With the help of His Majesty Uhtred, Lawrence's trusted aides gradually began to grasp the Empire's power. His adoptive father and Uncle Boris were both placed in important positions, becoming powerful ministers that no one dared to approach. Everyone could see through Uhtred's intentions. At this time, the other princes and the forces in their hands came and went to the imperial palace more and more frequently. Grand Duke Ashburn even brought Prince Charles to the imperial palace a few times a day in an attempt to change His Majesty the King's decision with his own strength. There were also some stubborn and conservative ministers who jointly wrote a letter to Uhtred, clearly stating that they wanted Uhtred to change his decision. They believed that Lawrence, as an illegitimate son, was simply unworthy of ascending to the pinnacle of Lancelot Empire's power. These people were all old ministers. The old traditions of nobility made it impossible for them to accept this fact. They believed that this was a kind of blasphemy against the Lancelot Empire's royal family. Uhtred's empress, as well as his most beloved wives and concubines, also joined the crusade against Uhtred one after another. For a time, undercurrents surged through Asan City like a tide. However, at this time, Uhtred suddenly fell seriously ill and fell into a coma. He was muddle-headed and showed signs of collapsing at any time. When the princes saw that such a situation had occurred, they disobeyed Uhtred's orders on the surface but disobeyed him in secret. They secretly began to mobilize the forces in their hands, preparing for the upcoming power purge. In the seemingly peaceful Asan City, a few unfamiliar faces suddenly appeared. A storm was slowly brewing. Once His Majesty Uhtred passed away, the storm that had been premeditated for a long time would definitely erupt. At that time, it would be hard to say whether it would engulf the entire Lancelot Empire. At this moment, the minister of the southern border, Firenze, suddenly returned to Asan City. The arrival of this malignant star caused the chaotic Asan City to be filled with too many variables. After listening to Butler Kalos' description, Han Shuo was stunned. He really did not expect that in just a few days' time, Asan City would actually undergo earth-shattering changes. It seemed that after King Uhtred understood that his days were numbered, his swift and decisive methods had played a huge role. In the few days that Han Shuo had left, Phoebe had come to look for Han Shuo 3 times. Lawrence had come to look for Han Shuo twice. There were also Fanny, Emily and the others, as well as some of the nobles of Asan City, who had come to pay their respects. After Kalos had finished reporting, Han Shuo thought for a moment, and immediately headed towards Lawrence's mansion. Currently, Lawrence was the crux of the entire Asan City. In the cruel struggle for the throne, Lawrence could not be lost. Only after Lawrence succeeded in ascending the throne, would Han Shuo's interests be protected to the greatest extent and advanced to the next level. Very quickly, Han Shuo arrived at Lawrence's mansion. From the butler's words, Han Shuo understood that Lawrence was having a secret discussion with someone. However, the butler clearly understood the extraordinary relationship between Han Shuo and Lawrence. Upon seeing Han Shuo's arrival, the butler immediately went in to report. After a while, the butler walked out and respectfully led Han Shaw towards Lawrence's secret meeting place. At Lawrence's secret meeting place, Han Shaw saw many familiar faces. Lawrence's adoptive father Ibu, Uncle Boris, Phoebe, Emily, Old Han of the Betteridge family, and another 10 or so people who were either rich or noble, but had unfamiliar appearances. From the looks of it, they should also be supporting Lawrence. After Han Shaw arrived, Lawrence, who was sitting on the main seat, immediately stood up and greeted him with a smile. "What did you run off to this time? Why are you only here now?" Lawrence had gone to the Imperial Palace many times in the past few days. When Uhtred met Lawrence alone, he repeatedly exhorted Lawrence to firmly hold on to Han Shaw and explained that Han Shaw was the crux of Lawrence's future. Although Uhtred didn't reveal Astrologer Grace's evaluation of Han Shaw, Lawrence was an extremely intelligent person. From the attitudes of the people around him, he already had an idea in his heart. He understood that Han Shaw was his destined benefactor. It was precisely because of this that when Han Shaw came in from outside, Lawrence, who now had a high status, was the first to stand up and personally welcome Han Shaw in with an extremely amiable attitude. This caused some of the surrounding subordinates who weren't too familiar with Han Shaw to feel a little surprised. "Nothing much, I went out for a small matter." "Oh, there's so many people." Han Shaw casually brushed off Lawrence, and couldn't help but exclaim when he saw the people around him. "Ha, Brian, you're really amazing. You've become a marquis in such a short time. I really didn't misjudge you." Lawrence's uncle, Boris, laughed heartily as he greeted Han Shaw. Originally, in order for Han Shaw to accumulate military merits, Lawrence had arranged for Han Shaw to take up a position in Boris's Northern Guard. Boris himself was only a count. Who would have thought that Han Shaw's position would rise so quickly? According to his current power, Han Shaw had clearly surpassed him. However, when he was in the Northern Guard, Boris had been very friendly towards Han Shaw precisely because he knew of Han Shaw's prospects. The two of them also had a good relationship in private. Therefore, when he saw Han Shaw walk over, he immediately greeted him in a friendly manner. "Heh, Lord Boris is too kind." Han Shaw smiled as he saluted Boris. Beside Boris sat Emily and Phoebe. The two girls were extremely close to each other, and had been whispering about something. Only when Han Shaw walked in did their bright eyes focus on Han Shaw. Old Han was also beside Emily, so she only glanced at Han Shaw before turning her head away to avoid arousing suspicion. However, Phoebe seemed to still be angry in her heart, and couldn't help but glare at Han Shaw a few more times. Her beautiful eyes revealed anger, as if she was blaming Han Shaw for his mysterious disappearance. "Not bad, young man. I haven't had the time to properly thank you for saving me last time. I've already told you to come visit my family when you have time. I'll definitely treat you well. I didn't think that you wouldn't come until now." "What? Could it be that you look down on my Betteridge family?" Old Han started out with a smile as he greeted Han Shaw, but pretended to be angry. "I've already gone to the Betteridge family and even secretly ate your wife." Han Shaw secretly thought to himself, but on the surface he put on a wronged expression. He innocently spread his hands and explained, "You also know that I've always been in Bretel City and only recently returned to Asen City. There are simply too many things on my hands. Next time I have time, I'll definitely pay you a visit." All right, I'm just joking with you. I know you're a busy person right now. I really feel a bit incredulous when I look at you. You saved my life the last time we met, but you still weren't famous at that time. Who would have thought that you'd become a hot figure in the Empire in just a few years? Amazing! Old Han smiled with emotion. As Old Han was speaking, Lawrence had already brought Han Shaw to his side and pointed at the chair next to Han Shaw for him to sit. He then introduced a few unfamiliar people to Han Shaw. I won't introduce them. You know them all anyway. You may not be familiar with these people, but they'll all be on the same side in the future. This is the current City Lord of Valen City. Every time Lawrence introduced a person, Han Shaw would nod his head in greeting. These people were either city lords, counts, or marquises. They were all either wealthy or noble people in the upper echelons of the empire. Under Lawrence's introduction, Han Shuo slowly understood the power he wielded. 3 counts and 2 marquises were all influential figures in Asan City. These people were all in their middle ages. If they didn't manage a large family clan, they held important positions under King Uhtred, or had military power in their hands. It seemed that only people of their age wouldn't be so stubborn as to believe that an illegitimate child couldn't ascend to the throne. Every time Lawrence introduced himself, these nobles would all nod to Han Shuo in an extremely friendly manner. Now that Han Shuo held great power in Bretel City, he was a popular person in His Majesty's eyes. The status of a marquis was just as noble as them. In addition to the fact that they were in the same camp, it would be strange if they weren't friendly to Han Shuo. When Lawrence finished his introductions, Han Shuo also had a general understanding of the power in Lawrence's hands. These marquises and counts were all people with real power. In addition, there was the Betteridge family and the Dark Mantle. In addition, there were a few experts who transcended worldly power supporting him. In this way, Lawrence indeed had the capital to contend against first Prince Charles. It seemed that Uhtred's swift and decisive actions had indeed brought great benefits to Lawrence. At the same time that Lawrence's power soared, it also made more nobles lean towards Lawrence, causing Lawrence to have the qualifications to contend against Charles for the throne. After Lawrence finished introducing the nobles that Han Shuo didn't know, he paused for a moment before continuing. We've just discussed some matters. I'll briefly explain them to you. Currently, we must make use of the power in our hands to the greatest extent possible. Taking advantage of the fact that my royal father is still alive, we must think of a way to make the people in our hands gain real power. On the other hand, on this basis, we must obtain even more powerful support in order to prevent Charles and the others from jumping over the wall in desperation. The great power of the empire is basically in the hands of the great nobles. Even if my royal father obviously supports me, if those great nobles firmly believe in Charles, they will still cooperate with Charles to rebel against me when my royal father passes away. This is very difficult to handle. The most important thing is that because of my identity, those stubborn fellows clearly won't choose me. However, the power in their hands is too great. Even if my royal father doesn't make any mistakes, there is no way to reduce the power in their hands. This is truly a headache. After Han Shuo sat down, he didn't say a word and only listened to Lawrence's description. After Lawrence finished, he understood that the situation wasn't as ideal as he had imagined. It seemed that even with Uhtred's support, Lawrence wouldn't be able to sit back and relax as Charles's previous advantage was too great. Your Highness, Grand Duke Ashburn's power is monstrous in the Empire. Some of the nobles he befriended occupy the majority of the nobles in the Empire. With him supporting the eldest prince, it will truly be very difficult to deal with him. Now that His Majesty is still around, he can still suppress him. However, if His Majesty is unable to hold on and passes away, Grand Duke Ashburn will definitely oppose with all his might. With the power in his hands, it is sufficient to change the situation. This will truly be somewhat difficult to deal with. A count named Terry said to Lawrence. That's right. Once His Majesty passes away, there is indeed no one who can control Ashburn. This is indeed extremely difficult to deal with. Lawrence's adoptive father, Evie, said with a distressed expression. All of you have forgotten about that person who just arrived in Asan City. If His Highness Lawrence has this person's support, I think the situation will be completely different. Old Han suddenly smiled and said to the crowd. Once these words were spoken, everyone's expressions changed. However, they immediately sighed. Boris opened his mouth and said, That unreasonable lunatic is indeed not an ordinary person. However, this person even dares to disobey His Majesty's orders. Who can convince him? Lawrence stared blankly for a moment before looking at Han Shuo with a fervent gaze. However, when Lawrence glanced at Emily and Phoebe, he hastily hid his fervent gaze. Just from Lawrence's gaze, Han Shuo knew that he was indeed aware of the relationship between Fanny and that lunatic Ferenza. Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He understood that Lawrence had a motive for deliberately befriending him. For him to start roping him in so early, it seemed that among the princes, Lawrence was the most far-sighted. Chapter 408. Han Sho didn't express any opinion on the latter part of the conversation between Lawrence and the others. He was only pondering about the influence that lunatic Firenze would have on him after arriving at Asan City. According to what Han Sho had promised Fanny, he understood that since Firenze had arrived at Asan City, he and Firenze would definitely meet very soon. Now that Han Sho already had two women, Phoebe and Emily, this matter would be exposed sooner or later. Once Fanny came to know of this matter, it was unknown what kind of reaction she would have. Phoebe was the same. She had just walked out of Emily's matter, and from the looks of it, her anger had yet to dissipate. If Fanny were to be added into the mix, it would be impossible for her to not reveal the truth. Unfortunately, at this stage, there was no way to conceal it no matter how one looked at it. "Brian! Brian!" Lawrence suddenly shouted twice. Han Sho was abruptly roused. He looked at Lawrence in astonishment and asked, "What? What do you think we should do next? Charles is our primary opponent. Do you have any good ideas?" Lawrence looked at Han Sho with sparkling eyes, seeking Han Sho's opinion. Han Sho was currently in a state of confusion and didn't seriously listen to the discussion of Lawrence and the others. He shook his head and said, "I don't have any good ideas." Hearing Han Sho's words and seeing Han Sho's somewhat worried expression, Lawrence understood that Han Sho might have some thoughts in his heart. He nodded and didn't continue asking. Instead, he continued to discuss matters with those nobles who were inclined towards him. Not long after, the group finished discussing matters. Those nobles left Lawrence in succession, including Emily and Old Han, leaving only Phoebe, Lawrence and Han Sho. "Brian, many thanks for introducing Mr. Crowley to me, allowing me to have such a powerful Grand Magus by my side." After those people left, Lawrence very sincerely thanked Han Sho. Han Sho was stunned for a moment before he reacted and said, "That Crowley defected to you?" "Yes, Mr. Crowley said that he only decided to come to my side after your persuasion." Lawrence smiled as he explained to Han Sho. "All right, Lawrence, I have some things to discuss with Phoebe, so I'll be leaving first." Han Sho thought for a moment and said to Lawrence, All right, you guys can leave first." Lawrence smiled and stood up to send them off. Phoebe pouted as if she was still angry at Han Sho. She returned to her carriage under Lawrence's escort. Han Sho hesitated for a moment, but then thought that most people knew about his relationship with Phoebe, so he immediately went in as well. Now that things had progressed to this point, it was likely that he could no longer conceal his relationship with the three girls. Han Sho seriously pondered for a moment, and decided that he might as well let go and tell the three girls everything. Fanny's vanity had been greatly satisfied after Han Sho's arrival a few days ago, and she had been in a good mood for the past few days. When she pushed open the door to the laboratory, intending to rest for a while, she suddenly saw Han Sho sitting on a chair in the room. Han Sho was currently in a trance, and his face was a bit pale. He sat there with a gloomy face and didn't say a word, as if he had something weighing thousands of kilograms on his mind. With just a glance, Fanny suddenly discovered that Han Sho was completely different from before. In the past, Han Sho had always been full of fighting spirit, or had a cheeky smile on his face, and had never been serious. He had never been as absent-minded as he was today. "Brian, what's wrong with you? Are you sick?" Fanny was a bit flustered and rushed to Han Sho's side, raising her hand to touch Han Sho's forehead. Hearing Fanny's voice, Han Sho woke up with a start. Looking at Fanny, who was full of worry for him, Han Sho's heart was even more pained. After staring blankly for a while, perhaps Han Sho wanted to feel more of Fanny's tenderness, so he only gazed deeply at Fanny's gentleness, and carefully savored the warmth of Fanny's warm hands. "What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? What's wrong with you?" Fanny saw that Han Sho didn't say a word and only stared blankly at her. She appeared even more flustered and impatiently questioned Han Sho, her face full of worry. "Fanny, I'm sorry!" Staring blankly at Fanny, Hans Shaw didn't know if this kind of tenderness would continue to exist after the truth was said, but he knew that he couldn't avoid it. In the end, he sighed and said to Fanny, "Are you sick? Are you sick? Why are you saying these things out of nowhere?" Fanny smiled and withdrew her warm hand from Hans Shaw's forehead. She gently looked at Hans Shaw's eyes and said with a smile. For some reason, Hans Shaw didn't dare to look directly at Fanny's bright eyes and lowered his head guiltily. Hans Shaw's heart moved. He suddenly remembered that he and Fanny hadn't had a physical relationship yet. So as long as he told the truth to Fanny, it probably wouldn't cause too much harm to Fanny. For the people he loved, Hans Shaw had never been a heartless person. The reason why Hans Shaw concealed the truth for such a long time was that, on the one hand, he selfishly enjoyed the wonderful feeling of hugging them, and on the other hand, he didn't want to be heartless and bring harm to them. However, now, Hans Shaw suddenly understood that his method of concealing the truth would indeed not bring harm to them in the short term, but this method would bring them a lifetime of pain. Because of this, Hans Shaw made up his mind to tell the truth to both sides honestly. However, Hans Shaw, who was guilty and in the wrong, didn't dare to face the tenderness in Fanny's eyes. Under Fanny's urgent inquiry, Hans Shaw also said in a low voice, "In addition to you, I have 2 other women." "I'm sorry!" Fanny's small hand that was gently stroking Hans Shaw's hair suddenly stopped. Hans Shaw could raise his head to look and suddenly found that Fanny's movements were stiff and stunned. Her gentle eyes were filled with helplessness and pain, and her rosy lips turned pale. She couldn't help but squirm as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. 2 streaks of tears flowed down her smooth face and all the way to Fanny's neck. After a long, long time, Fanny's colorless eyes focused on Hans Shaw. She looked miserable and said softly in a bitter voice, "Brian, are you telling me this because you want to break off relations with me?" Hans Shaw was stunned and didn't understand Fanny's behavior. According to Hans Shaw's thoughts, Fanny should be as furious as Phoebe and desperate to drive him out of this place. He didn't expect that Fanny would have such a miserable expression at this moment, like a helpless flower bud that had bloomed. A strong sense of self-blame suddenly surged into Hans Shaw's heart. Hans Shaw's eyes turned red, and he pulled Fanny into his arms. He choked with sobs. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I'm sorry, Brian, I already knew about the matter between you and Miss Phoebe," Fanny said in a faint voice. She then used all her strength to hug Hans Shaw tightly, as if she was afraid that Hans Shaw would leave her side. Hans Shaw's face was dull, and he subconsciously hugged Phoebe tightly. His mind was filled with a series of questions. How did she know? How did she know? You are a dazzling star of the Empire. Everything related to you is widely spread, including some matters between you and Miss Phoebe. It's funny that you still deceive yourself into thinking that I don't know about it. When I first heard this news, I didn't believe it. However, through my own understanding, I finally believe this fact. Ha, I'm really a weak woman. I should have kept my distance from you from the beginning and didn't dare to be tempted by you. However, when you were not around, my mind was filled with your shadow, and I could never get rid of it. I'm sorry I can't do it. Even though I know that you already have Miss Phoebe, I still can't leave you. As long as I think that we will never meet again, my heart will be suffocated with sadness. You may never understand this feeling. I'm useless. I can't get out of the whirlpool of your feelings, and instead, I can't extricate myself from it," Fanny muttered in a self-deprecating voice in Hans Shaw's arms. Her voice was full of helplessness and misery. Hans Shaw's pretense of being infallible was ruthlessly torn apart by his heartfelt words. Hans Shaw was dizzy with an incomparably strong sense of happiness. Although this kind of happiness carried an extremely bitter taste, although this kind of happiness caused Hans Shaw's lips to dry up and his eyes to turn red, and his indomitable heart to become weak. "I know, Phoebe is a good woman. You came here this time because you've made up your mind to leave me, right?" Fanny murmured in a self-pitying voice. Her tone was indescribably bitter and depressed. Her tears were like a broken string of pearls, dripping on Han Shuo's shoulder in big drops. No! Han Shuo growled in a low voice. I will never leave you, never! I've said so much just to ask for your forgiveness. I've never thought of leaving you. I'm sorry, it's all my fault, it's all my fault. Fanny's delicate body trembled slightly. She suddenly stood up straight from Han Shuo's chest. Her tearful eyes were filled with inexplicable expectation. She stared at Han Shuo's face. Her trembling voice was filled with disbelief. Brian, you're serious? Nodding his head heavily, Han Shuo had never been as serious as he was now. He promised in a choked voice. As long as you don't leave me, I'll never let go and leave you first. I promise. But I've experienced 2 years of torture and pain. Only then did I realize the fact that I can never leave you. I don't mind the existence of you, Miss Phoebe, and other women. But I'm afraid that Miss Phoebe will mind my existence, right? Fanny said bitterly. I don't know, but I'll give her and myself some time. Perhaps she'll make a good decision in the end. But no matter what her decision is, it won't change our relationship. It definitely won't, Han Shuo said resolutely. Fanny's eyes were filled with uncontrollable surprise and happiness. She took the initiative to hug Han Shuo tightly again. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed Han Shuo passionately. Her hands even boldly reached into Han Shuo's clothes. As she caressed Han Shuo's strong body, she also tried to help Han Shuo take off his clothes. Chapter 409. For some unknown reason, Fanny was so proactive and passionate for the first time. Whether it was her kiss or her movements, they were all unrestrained and bold. At this moment, Han Shuo had become the passive recipient. Fanny's previous words contained a deep affection that was as deep as the ocean. It gave Han Shuo a great shock and made Han Shuo feel too much guilt towards Fanny. When the two kissed, Han Shuo, who had always been the aggressor, was actually not so overbearing. Ugh! Brian! Fanny's face was flush red and she moaned softly with shyness and timidity. Han Shuo's outer clothing had been unknowingly taken off by Fanny. Han Shuo's naked upper body was incomparably strong, and every inch of muscle seemed to be filled with explosive power. When Fanny couldn't catch her breath, her fragrant lips left Han Shuo's mouth and she looked at Han Shuo's naked upper body, her bright eyes brimming with intense amorous feelings. You want me? Moaning softly like a mosquito, Fanny's face was flush red and she buried her head deep into Han Shuo's chest. Smelling the rich male scent on Han Shuo's body, she only felt her heart become a tangled mess. Even she could hear the sound of her heartbeat clearly. No! Han Shuo smiled wryly and refused. Fanny's face was filled with panic, and she suddenly raised her head to look at Han Shuo. Her blushing cheeks were filled with pitiful grief and puzzlement, and her bright eyes were filled with confusion and panic. Master Jean is coming and it's daytime right now. You still have class later. How about at night? Han Shuo smiled wryly as he scratched his head and spoke softly to Fanny. It was only after Han Shuo's words that Fanny abruptly reacted. She blushed and hastily put on Han Shuo's clothes, saying anxiously, Yes, then leave first. We'll talk about this later. At this moment, the footsteps of Master Jean of the Necromancy Major were slowly approaching. Even Fanny herself could hear it. Fanny was even more flustered. She felt guilty and hurriedly urged Han Shuo to leave. Han Shuo nodded with a wry smile and casually put on his clothes. He had already left Fanny's lab before Jean could approach. On the way back to his residence, Han Shuo was indescribably moved by Fanny's deep feelings. He never would have thought that Fanny had actually struggled bitterly for so long because of his matters. Even though Fanny knew some of his matters, she still didn't abandon him. This kind of deep feelings made Han Shuo feel as if he was unable to repay her. When Han Shuo returned to the residence, Steward Carlos hurriedly rushed over and said with a grave expression, Lord Marquis, Grand Duke Ashburn and First Prince Charles request an audience. They'd been waiting for quite a while. What are they here for? Startled, Han Shuo frowned and asked in confusion. This lowly one doesn't know, Kalas respectfully replied. Filled with doubts, Han Sho walked towards the hall used to receive distinguished guests. With a glance, he saw first Prince Charles, whom he had previously met in the Northern Rose Garden. This was the first time Han Sho had seen Duke Ashburn beside Charles. With just a glance, Han Sho knew that this person was a crafty old fox and wasn't someone that could be easily dealt with. The two of them had relaxed expressions as they sipped tea in the hall. They actually didn't bring any attendants with them. When Han Sho heard Steward Kalos report, he released his mystical demons to observe the surroundings of the residence. Only then did he discover that there were two gorgeous carriages parked at the corner of the main entrance, and a group of knights standing guard. Han Sho, who was worried about Fanny and Phoebe's matters, had many thoughts running through his mind along the way and neglected the surrounding situation. Only after circling around the residence with his mystical demons did he discover the different situation within the residence. This was the capital, Asan City. Ashburn and First Prince Charles had openly come to pay their respects to Han Sho, and naturally weren't afraid that Han Sho would suddenly rise in revolt. That was why they boldly left the group of knights outside and didn't bring any experts to protect them. On the surface, the two of them could be considered to have quite the presence. When he saw Han Sho walk in, Ashburn signaled Charles with his eyes. He immediately stood up and nodded to Han Sho with a smile, saying, "Marquis Brian's name has reverberated like thunder. Seeing you today, it is indeed a well-deserved reputation. Within my Lancelot empire, a man as imposing as Marquis Brian is truly rare." Hee hee. Han Sho wasn't in a good mood. He had heard many stories of the old fox Ashburn and Charles throwing their weight around in the empire, and didn't have a good impression of the two. He replied with a fake smile. "Lord Duke overpraises me. In front of Lord Duke, no one's name can be said to reverberate like thunder. Greetings, Your Highness the First Prince." According to etiquette, Han Sho once again bowed to First Prince Charles. He dispense with the formalities. In the past, I had some misunderstandings with Marquis Brian. This time, I've come to pay a visit in hopes of clearing up the misunderstandings between us. First Prince Charles looked amiably at Han Sho. His friendly attitude was as different as heaven and earth compared to the last time in the Rose Garden. "Your Highness is too polite. We have never had any misunderstandings. I don't know what's going on with your words." Han Sho was stunned. Soon after, he looked at Charles with a baffled expression. Lightly coughing, Duke Ashburn said with a smile, "In the past, I asked Cameron for help with some matters. I didn't expect that Mr. Cameron would actually become Miss Phoebe's business rival. That Cameron fellow really deserves to die. He actually used Charles's name to intimidate others and dared to find trouble with Miss Phoebe. We weren't aware of this matter at the start. However, I think that Marquis Brian might misunderstand that we instigated Cameron to do so. Therefore, I specially came over to clarify the matter with Marquis Brian. I hope that Marquis Brian won't misunderstand us because of this matter. To be honest, Charles and I have always admired you and hope to become friends with you." "Misunderstanding? There simply isn't any misunderstanding. Without your instigation, how would Cameron dare to intimidate others and make a move against Phoebe?" Han Sho sneered in his heart. He had already understood Ashburn and Charles's goal from their tone. He was certain that it was because of his position in Uhtred's heart, causing Ashburn and Charles to understand his importance. Therefore, they had condescended to deliberately befriend him. Then it must be a misunderstanding. This matter has passed for so long that I've almost forgotten about it. There's nothing to discuss. Han Sho narrowed his eyes and played down this matter. Soon after, he smiled at Ashburn and Charles and asked, "I wonder why Lord Duke and Your Highness have come to find me this time? Brettel City's development is the most exciting news in the Empire in recent days. The city lord of Seamus City, Karev, who is only one step away from Brettel City, has an extremely close relationship with me. If Brettel City and Seamus City are able to cooperate closely, our development in all aspects will be even faster. The reason I've come this time is to discuss with Marquis Brian that Seamus City can provide some assistance to Bretel City. For example, population and other resources that Bretel City lacks. Eldest Prince Charles smiled as he looked at Han Shaw, slowly talking about proper business. Seamus City's City Lord Karev was a member of the Haug family. His sister, Kalina, was eldest Prince Charles's wife. His relationship with Charles was naturally very close. Seamus City and Bretel City weren't far apart. If Seamus City could provide some effective assistance, it would naturally be greatly beneficial to Bretel City's development. This was something Han Shaw understood in his heart. Then, what does our Bretel City need to pay? Han Shaw asked Charles without batting an eyelid. I don't need to pay anything. As long as I can win Marquis Brian's friendship, I'll be satisfied. Charles stared at Han Shaw with a scorching gaze as he replied. Grand Duke Ashburn smiled as he looked at Han Shaw. After thinking for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, Marquis Brian, to be frank, I admire you very much. If you don't mind, we can discuss in detail the possibility of cooperation. The authority and benefits we can bring you will far exceed what others can give you. As long as we cooperate, authority, wealth, and women will be at your fingertips. Han Shaw chuckled as he looked at the two. Under their expectant gazes, he resolutely shook his head and said, I'm sorry, I'm a person who cherishes old friendships and knows how to repay favors. Both of you should understand what I mean. Eldest Prince Charles's expression suddenly darkened when he heard this. Just as he was about to say something, Ashburn glared at him. Shortly after, Ashburn smiled and said, Is that so? I understand. Since that's the case, then we'll take our leave. I'm really sorry for disturbing you this time. I hope you can forgive us. After Ashburn glared at him, eldest Prince Charles didn't suddenly lose his composure. His expression darkened as he looked at Han Shaw with an additional trace of anger, as if he was angry that Han Shaw didn't know how to appreciate kindness when given face. Then I won't send you off. Han Shaw looked at Grand Duke Ashburn in astonishment. He didn't expect him to be so straightforward. Once he understood that there was no hope, he didn't hesitate at all. Marquis Brian, take care. Before Charles left, he suddenly turned his head to glance at Han Shaw and said meaningfully, Many thanks for eldest prince's reminder. I will be careful. Han Shaw's expression suddenly turned cold as he replied in an unfriendly manner. Han Shaw clearly heard the threat in Charles's tone. He knew that after this time, there would no longer be any room for friendly relations with Charles and Ashburn's forces. The only path left was to fight to the death. Chapter 410. Han Shaw knew that Charles definitely wouldn't let him off. However, Han Shaw didn't expect that Charles's revenge would come so quickly and so ferociously. That night, Han Shaw, who was in the middle of researching the incantation to connect to another world, suddenly sensed a few powerful auras gradually approaching his mansion from afar. Han Shaw was abruptly roused from his contemplation. The 12 mystical demons were immediately released. With Han Shaw's mansion as the center, they spread out in 12 different directions like a spider's web. A troop of 500 knights, mixed with 200 temple knights from the Church of Light, headed towards Han Shaw's mansion from 4 different directions. Light Grand Magus Kos of the Church of Light, as well as a few experts from the Church of Light that Han Shaw didn't recognize, as well as a few powerful Deathsworn attached to Ashburn, led their troops and surrounded him. There was no moon on this night. Under the pitch-black curtain of night, this group of people didn't have any concealment. They were simply heading straight for Han Shaw's mansion in an open and above-board manner. Han Shaw could see the killing intent in the eyes of those knights. Han Shaw was frightened and hastily walked out of the secret room. The scene that he saw through the 12 mystical demons was simply unimaginable to Han Shaw. Even if Ashburn and Charles were more powerful, how could they dare to be so impudent in the capital of the Lancelot Empire, Asen City? The mansion that Han Shaw lived in was surrounded by either the rich or the noble, all of them were influential figures of the empire. Even on this moonless night, such a large movement was absolutely impossible to conceal. Furthermore, Asen City was the headquarters of the Dark Mantle. After all, Ashburn wasn't the Empire's King Uhtred. What right did he have to be so arrogant? A series of suspicions surged into Han Shuo's mind. He only felt that Ashburn must have gone mad. Such a crazy action definitely wasn't something that a wily old fox would dare to do. Unfortunately, Kasa's appearance, and the presence of a few of his ministers in the Duke's mansion already proved that this action was indeed Ashburn's instigation. Just as Han Shuo was at a loss, a mansion not far away suddenly burst into flames. A mystical demon just happened to see the situation in that direction and saw a group of knights charging in and killing anyone they saw. In the blink of an eye, blood dyed the rocky ground red. Not even a single servant was spared. Han Shuo vaguely remembered that the mansion belonged to Earl Terry. Terry was inclined towards Lawrence. Han Shuo had even seen this person early in the morning. Through Lawrence's introduction, he knew that this person's mansion wasn't far from his. He didn't expect that his mansion had already fallen into such a state. A flash of inspiration flashed through Han Shuo's mind. He suddenly understood. Since Ashburn dared to act so brazenly and disregard King Uhtred's authority, there were only two possibilities. One was that Ashburn knew that the situation wasn't good and rebelled a step ahead of time. There was another possibility, which was that King Uhtred had already died. This way, Ashburn would no longer be restricted by anyone. Only then would he dare to act freely, using the fastest speed to eradicate those who were unfavorable to him, swiftly taking control of Asen City. However, if Ashburn wanted to rebel, he should have taken action the day King Uhtred expressed his support for Lawrence. He definitely wouldn't have watched Uhtred slowly delegate authority to Lawrence without doing anything. From this point of view, the first possibility was relatively small. Instead, King Uhtred's sudden death was the most reasonable. Carrying this kind of doubt, only 2 of the 12 mystical demons remained in his mansion. The other 10 mystical demons began to spread out with Han Shuo's mansion as the center. One of them headed straight for the Imperial Palace. At the location of the mystical demons, Han Shuo discovered that even more soldiers were being mobilized in the pitch-black night. There were also other places that were similarly shrouded in cruel massacres. There were nobles who were inclined towards Lawrence, and there were also some who were on the side of the second and youngest princes. Suddenly, the entire interior of Asen City was filled with smoke. Without a doubt, Ashburn and eldest Prince Charles had already begun to take action. A bloody massacre against the other powers had officially begun on this moonless night. Any power that was hostile to Ashburn and Charles was destined to suffer disastrous casualties tonight. After understanding the situation, Han Shuo quickly went to Butler Carlos' room. Butler Carlos was getting on in years. Old people wouldn't be able to sleep too deeply, especially when Han Shuo's footsteps were deliberately louder when he came over. Therefore, Carlos immediately woke up. "Lord Marquis, what's wrong?" Carlos had never seen Han Shuo so anxious before. With a start, he sat up from his bed and immediately asked, "Don't bring anything. Immediately wake up all the servants and escape from the Marquis residence. Duke Ashburn has rebelled and a group of knights are currently on their way here. Once they arrive, no one here will be able to survive. Quickly leave this place, immediately," Han Shuo quickly explained. After he finished speaking, he didn't care about this place anymore and quickly left the Marquis residence, heading straight for the Buzz Merchant Guild where Phoebe was. This residence was bestowed to Han Shuo by Uhtred. However, it was clear that Han Shuo didn't treat it as a true home. There wasn't a single person that Han Shuo truly cared about inside. Han Shuo was used to placing important things in his space ring. At this time, there wasn't anyone or anything worth remembering here, so he immediately left after reminding Carlos. Not many people knew about the relationship between Han Shuo and Fanny. In addition, Fanny and Lawrence also didn't have any interactions. In addition, Fanny's father was Firenze. As the king of the southern border, Firenze was one of the few people that Ashburn was apprehensive of. Han Shuo basically didn't need to worry about Fanny's safety. Emily was at the Dark Mantle headquarters. Within the entire Asen City, The Dark Mantle headquarters' defenses were the most solid. Inside, there were transportation arrays that extended in all directions that led to every major city in the Empire. Even if Ashburn had heaven-defying methods, he would still be unable to take down the Dark Mantle headquarters in a short period of time. It was even more impossible for him to capture the Dark Mantle's upper echelon. Thus, Han Shuo similarly wasn't worried about Emily. Only Phoebe, as she was too close to Lawrence, and the Buzz Merchant Guild had repeatedly spoiled Grand Duke Ashburn's plans, was most likely to be attacked. As the Grand Duke of the Empire, the power that Ashburn grasped was only second to King Uhtred. Even if it was Phoebe's master, Sacred Sword Master Corel, Ashburn similarly wouldn't place him in his eyes. With the full support of the Church of Light, it was likely that Ashburn would have even more experts at his disposal. It was almost impossible for Sacred Sword Master Corel to rely on his own strength to kill Ashburn. Along the way, Han Shuo sped as fast as lightning towards the Buzz Merchant Guild. Along the way, he discovered through the mystical demons that even more changes had occurred in Asan City. Many noble mansions had been reduced to ruins in an extremely short period of time. Some small mansions were razed to the ground within a few breaths of time under a few large-scale destructive magic spells. Ashburn's methods were extremely ruthless. As long as it was an enemy, regardless of whether it was a servant or a guest, not a single one would be spared. Many noble mansions in Asan City were shrouded in cruel massacres. During this process, the army under his control had marched towards the city gates, most likely intending to take control of all the city gates. The few teleportation magic arrays within Asan City had long been in Ashburn's hands. Layers of troops had firmly surrounded the teleportation magic arrays, making it impossible for anyone to leave Asan City through the teleportation magic arrays. It seemed that Ashburn and Charles were intending to completely take control of Asan City and wipe out all the enemies within. The mystical demon that was heading towards the Imperial Palace heard loud wails before it even neared. The army that was inclined towards eldest Prince Charles had already taken control of the Imperial Palace. The mystical demon had only circled around once before discovering that King Uhtred had indeed died. Some of the rebels had already been killed on the spot. From these signs, Han Shuo suddenly understood that King Uhtred's sudden death was most likely related to eldest Prince Charles. Otherwise, the Imperial Palace wouldn't have been sealed off and there wouldn't have been no news leaking out. Those princes were most likely kept in the dark tonight, and simply didn't know of His Majesty's grievous news. Within Duke Ashburn's mansion, he was together with eldest Prince Charles. Beside him were numerous noble supporters. These people had gloomy expressions as they commanded the officers to seize control of various key points while reporting out the names of the nobles, allowing their subordinates to eradicate them. A mystical demon circled over and clearly heard the conversation between Ashburn, Charles, and the others. It finally understood that this matter was indeed a fierce counterattack by Ashburn and eldest Prince Charles. Suddenly, a mystical demon arrived at the Buzz Merchant Guild ahead of time and saw a group of soldiers coldly killing people from afar. The merchants and guards of the Buzz Merchant Guild had all died tragically under the crossbow arrows of those people. However, it was fortunate that these people had just started their attack from the front of the house and clearly hadn't penetrated deep into the interior of the Buzz Merchant Guild. He reckoned that nothing would happen to Phoebe for the time being. Han Shuo's heart was burning with anxiety. He unleashed the demonic Ninth Heaven's art to its limit, and rushed towards the Buzz Merchant Guild like a meteor chasing after the moon. He constantly prayed that nothing would happen to Phoebe. If something really happened to Phoebe, even if Han Shuo had promised Uhtred, he would still break the promise and skin Charles alive. Chapter 411. Smoke rose from all directions within the Buzz Merchant Guild. Ashburn's subordinates charged in and killed anyone they saw. The guards within the guild simply didn't have any leeway to retaliate, and were instantly killed or injured in large numbers. Phoebe, who had been scared out of her wits by Han Shuo's words, raised the divine weapon, Starry Sky, and led the guards within the guild to defend with all their might. However, the situation was clearly far from good. The soldiers attacking the Bus Merchant Guild this time also included a few experts who had attached themselves to Charles. Among them was a temple knight from the Church of Light who wielded a silver spear as if he was invincible. Every time his spear descended, a guard would definitely die. There were also a few mages who continuously released magic, causing the buildings within the Bus Merchant Guild to catch fire. Some of the rations and goods stored inside were burning amidst the raging flames. Some servants walked out of their rooms covered in flames, but a rain of arrows whizzed over, piercing through those innocent servants. In an extremely short period of time, the Bus Merchant Guild fell under the unyielding attack. Only Phoebe and a group of loyal guards were left, hastily retreating towards the back door. During this process, the guards by Phoebe's side were killed one after another. "Miss Phoebe, you won't be able to escape today!" Space Archmage Aubrey looked at Phoebe with a sinister smile as he spoke unhurriedly. Last time within the Bus Merchant Guild, it was Space Archmage Aubrey and Cameron who had come to force Phoebe. Unfortunately, they just so happened to run into Han Shaw. In the end, Aubrey and Cameron were respectively poisoned by ice and fire by Han Shaw, suffering in an abyss of suffering for the next few days. Aubrey naturally understood that everything was caused by Han Shaw. However, he understood that Han Shaw wasn't someone he could provoke. He could only swallow his bitterness and harbor thoughts of revenge in his heart. Today, he had come to the Bus Merchant Guild again. Aubrey had the Temple Knights of the Church of Light by his side, as well as even more magic experts. He had complete confidence in accomplishing what he couldn't accomplish the last time, which was to capture Phoebe to threaten Sacred Sword Master Corel, making Corel not dare to act blindly without thinking. Behind Aubrey, there was a team of 100 soldiers, as well as the Temple Knight with the olive branch pattern on his chest. Phoebe, who was running away, only had 30 guards. Even though Phoebe was a great swordsman, she had no chance of winning. While Aubrey was speaking, a spatial laceration spell had already been released. A bright, sharp blade streaked past, and several large pieces of the bodyguards beside Phoebe suddenly disappeared. Parts of their bodies had been taken away by the spatial laceration spell, falling into another space. Bang! Phoebe, who'd been retreating, suddenly felt as if her back had collided with an invisible wall. Her entire body was bounced forward a few steps. "Aubrey, you still dare come to my Bus Merchant Guild? Are you crazy? There are so many servants and guards, and you actually dare to kill without asking anything?" Phoebe clearly didn't know of the news of King Uhtred's death. Just like Han Shaw, her heart was filled with incomparable shock. She didn't expect Ashburn to be so audacious. "Haha, we aren't crazy. After tonight, Asen City and the Lancelot Empire will belong to His Highness Charles. Tonight, any hostile forces will be eliminated." Aubrey laughed savagely. "Don't talk nonsense. Capture this woman as soon as possible. We still have other matters to attend to." The Temple Knight of the Church of Light suddenly spoke. Hearing the Temple Knight's words, Aubrey awkwardly stopped laughing. He nodded and said, "Lord Crespo, this woman is a great swordsman. We still need to work together in order to capture her alive. Let's do it!" The Temple Knight called Crespo didn't say any more superfluous words. He raised the silver spear in his hand and walked towards Phoebe. The silver spear was extended, and milky white rays of light shot out from the spear's tip. A divine aura slowly overflowed from Crespo's body. His shining silver armor suddenly emitted rays of light, causing Crespo's aura to soar. Phoebe was startled. Before Crespo could approach, she took a step back and brandished the divine weapon, Starry Sky. A huge cross suddenly shot out and arrived in front of Crespo in an instant. Crespo lightly snorted and raised his spear, meeting the huge cross. The cross suddenly soared into the sky and chopped a tree that was as thick as a bowl into two. "You are just a newly advanced great swordsman. You should just surrender," Crespo said coldly. His body turned into a series of afterimages due to his high speed. The silver spear in his hand suddenly turned into several hundred spears and pierced towards Phoebe. A circle of starlight fiercely shot out from the divine weapon's starry sky. The specks of starlight spread out and formed a cross. It suddenly exploded with a frightening impact force. Several hundred illusory silver spears suddenly exploded into the air, and the explosive force spread out. Crespo let out a muffled groan and hastily retreated a few steps. Good, very good. You can actually borrow the power of the divine weapon and fuse it with Carol's cross slash. No wonder that old thing Carol values you so much, Crespo said with a cold expression as he retreated a few steps. The shoulders of his silver armor had 7 to 8 small holes as he spoke. I didn't expect that the Temple Knights of the Church of Light would actually become the first prince's lackeys. Is this something a religious organization like you that transcends authority should do? Phoebe similarly ridiculed with a face full of disdain. Miss, let's leave quickly. We will stay behind to cover the rear. The Buzz Merchant Guild's guard captain impatiently pleaded with Phoebe. Shaking her head, Phoebe helplessly said, We can't leave. There weren't any powerful mages on Phoebe's side. When faced with this group of warhorses, mages, and archers working together, fleeing wasn't a wise choice, because mages who could fly were far faster than them. Aubrey, call your men to attack together. After capturing this woman, we still have other matters to attend to. Don't waste too much time. Crespo shot a glance at Aubrey and said coldly with a frown. Nodding his head, Aubrey agreed. All right, let's attack together. After Aubrey nodded his head, Crespo once again raised his spear and walked towards Phoebe. He spun his silver spear and a bright silver light suddenly shot out. At the same time, Aubrey started chanting an incantation. A space magic binding caused the surrounding space to fluctuate and shackled Phoebe at the center. The mages beside Aubrey all chanted incantations and various magic barriers fell towards Phoebe. A few archers from further away also arrived and drew their bows, aiming at Phoebe. Bang! Phoebe blocked Crespo's silver light with her sword. She suddenly felt a powerful attack and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. It was these 2 steps that instantly pulled Phoebe into the space binding. Suddenly, all kinds of formless energy surged over. Phoebe felt as if she was being bound by a myriad of ropes, unable to move. Take her away. With this Phoebe here, that old bastard Carell will definitely know his place. Aubrey laughed complacently and instructed the knights behind him. Heh, this woman is really beautiful. TSK, her skin is too smooth. I have never seen a woman with such soft and supple skin. A knight came over with a lecherous smile. When he used the rope to bind Phoebe, he tried to touch Phoebe's face. When Phoebe, who couldn't move her hands or speak, saw a coarse hand heading towards her face, her bright eyes filled with intense alarm and anger. Uncontrollably, Phoebe thought of Han Shui at her weakest moment. How good would it be if this scoundrel could come and save me? As long as you appear, I might forgive you. I don't want anyone other than you to touch me. When a woman was frightened and helpless, the first person she would think of would be her man. Phoebe was no exception. Seeing the knight's large hand about to touch her face, Phoebe lost her head out of fear and strongly called out to Han Shui in her heart. Whoosh! Just when the coarse hand was about to land on Phoebe's face, a strange sound suddenly rang out. Shortly after, that knight suddenly howled crazily. That coarse hand was chopped off at the wrist, dripping with blood as it fell at Phoebe's feet. Who is it? Crespo suddenly shouted, vigilantly looking all around. The silver pike in his hand was constantly swallowing and spitting out silver rays. Whoosh! In the moonless night, a wisp of black lightning flashed. That knight with his wrist chopped off once again howled miserably. Everyone looked over and discovered that the knight's other hand, which was covering his broken wrist, had also been chopped off. Capture Phoebe, hurry up! Aubrey suddenly reacted and hastily instructed those stunned knights. After being stunned for a moment, those people immediately took action. They held thick ropes in their hands, planning to first tie up Phoebe. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. That wisp of black light repeatedly appeared, like a black thread weaving the curtain of the night. The extended hands of the knights who tried to approach Phoebe were chopped off one after another. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, there was actually a pile of broken hands at Phoebe's feet. Although Phoebe was confined by magic and could not budge, her eyes did not miss anything that happened around her. Her heart was suddenly filled with intense joy. Without even thinking, Phoebe knew that Han Shaw had arrived. This time, when the panic was dispelled, Phoebe instantly forgot about all the bad things about Han Shaw. She only remembered that Han Shaw had helped her time and time again. Brian. Damn it, why did he only come now? Phoebe called out in her heart, her eyes overflowing with happiness and serenity. She was no longer worried about the dangers around her, as if with the existence of that wisp of black light, there would be no danger that could threaten her. Come out, you cowardly sneak attacker! Crespo suddenly shouted and quickly rushed toward Phoebe. That person is coming. Aubrey was suddenly gobsmacked and reacted, shrieking at Crespo. Crespo's body froze midway, but he immediately reacted and shouted. Impossible, that guy can't even protect himself. He shouldn't have appeared here so quickly. Who said so? A gloomy and cold voice suddenly came from afar. When the voice faded, a figure was already standing by Phoebe's side. Han Shaw shot a glance at Crespo, his left hand lightly pressing on Phoebe's back. A ferocious force suddenly erupted, and a series of crackling sounds rang out around Phoebe. Several barriers and Aubrey's imprisonment were suddenly torn apart and destroyed. Phoebe, who was originally imprisoned and unable to budge, suddenly felt that her whole body could move. Before Han Shaw had arrived, Phoebe had constantly called out in her heart, thinking that if Han Shaw rescued her again, she would forgive Han Shaw's fickleness. However, when Han Shaw truly appeared in front of her, Phoebe was still brooding over the previous matter and felt that she couldn't easily forgive Han Shaw. Thus, she snorted lightly and didn't say anything. Heh, you dare touch my woman? You're courting death. After Han Shaw released the imprisonment on Phoebe's body with one strike, he viciously looked at the people in front of him and sneered. Pa! Who's your woman? You fickleness scoundrel! Phoebe was both embarrassed and happy. She couldn't help but glare hatefully at Han Shaw, panting with rage as she said, I still haven't forgiven you for that matter. Don't talk nonsense with me. Of course it's Miss Phoebe, you're my woman. If you weren't my woman, why would I run all the way from the northern part of the city to save you? Han Shaw grinned and said to Phoebe, It's really you. How is this possible? How did you escape from Lord Casa's hands? Crespo's expression changed as he looked at Han Shaw in shock. Cas? Ha, in the previous battles, it seemed like that guy was always running away, right? Han Shaw was calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos as he spoke to Crespo. As he spoke, Han Shaw had already taken out the skeletal staff, his expression gradually turning cold. It's different this time. Apart from Lord Cas, there's also Lord Brown. How did you escape? Crespo was greatly puzzled and retreated with some fear. In the Church of Light, Han Shaw's infamy was extremely great. After Red Archbishop Cas repeatedly failed at his hands, Han Shaw's strength was gradually recognized by the people of the Church of Light. Crespo could be considered to be self-aware and knew that he wasn't Han Shaw's match with his strength. Thus, he had thoughts of retreating in his heart. All of you, don't even think of leaving alive. Han Shaw declared their fates as the skeletal staff began to summon undead creatures. Red Archbishop Cas, who wielded the divine weapon, Revelation, wasn't here, and there wasn't a light mage here who could quickly purify the undead creatures. Han Shaw had absolute confidence that he could quickly kill them. Chapter 412. Under the summons of the skeletal staff, a dense mass of undead creatures surrounded Han Shaw. Han Shaw held Phoebe in one hand and the skeletal staff in the other, rapidly chanting an incantation. Retreat, retreat! Crespo decisively gave the order and took the lead in retreating. Aubrey, the person in charge of this operation, immediately understood that this operation had failed once again when he saw Han Shaw suddenly appear beside Phoebe. When the hordes of undead creatures gradually appeared, Aubrey also wanted to retreat. Crespo's order to retreat was exactly what he wanted, so Aubrey also began to retreat. Want to run? It's too late. Hanshaw released his grip on Phoebe's small hand and suddenly flew towards Aubrey, the skeletal staff still tightly held in his left hand and the demon's lair edge emerging from his right hand. Aubrey had long since suffered a great loss at Hanshaw's hands. When he saw Hanshaw rushing towards him, his expression immediately changed greatly. He hastily shouted to the archers on the surrounding rooftops, "Shoot him to death!" A rain of arrows rapidly shot towards Hanshaw. The strength and speed of these arrows indicated that these archers possessed extraordinary strength. However, before these arrows could reach Hanshaw, the skeletal staff in Hanshaw's hand shook and several white bone shields suddenly appeared, blocking all the arrows in several directions. Hanshaw's speed exceeded Aubrey's expectations. Just as Aubrey turned around to look, the cold and stern Hanshaw had already arrived not far behind him. "Careful!" Crespo suddenly shouted from nearby, the silver spear in his hand piercing towards Hanshaw at high speed like a drill bit. Hanshaw turned his head and shot a glance. With a wave of his right hand, the demon's lair edge left his hand in a streak of black light and pierced the tip of the silver spear with a whoosh. Clang! A dazzling radiance blossomed, and Crespo only felt a huge force enter his body through the spear's shaft. It rushed into his internal organs from his arm, and instantly caused serious damage to his divine body. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, and retreated with a pale face. Clang! Crespo's silver spear fell to the ground, splitting into two halves. The remaining power of the demon's lair edge didn't diminish in the slightest as it continued to stab towards Crespo's chest like a shadow. Before Crespo could stabilize himself, the demon's lair edge pierced through the bright silver armor on Crespo's body, creating a large hole in his chest. A bone-piercing pain spread from his chest. Crespo's pale face was filled with despair as he stared blankly at the bloody hole in his chest. In the end, he spat out, "How is this possible?" before collapsing with a loud crash. Aubrey was frightened out of his wits as he desperately fled into the distance, no longer caring about the lives of others. As the main helper of this operation, Crespo was originally a Sky Knight. After joining the Temple Knights of the Church of Light, he received the additional protection of divine power due to his devout belief in the God of Light. His strength was much higher than that of an ordinary Sky Knight. That silver spear and the bright silver armor on his body were both items that only high-ranking members of the Temple Knights were qualified to possess. In the eyes of any alchemist on the continent, they were very high-grade weapons. Both the weapon and the armor even contained divine power. Who would have thought that they would be torn apart like paper under the attack of that weapon? This caused Aubrey to tremble with fear. The fleeing Aubrey obviously didn't understand that Hanshaw's speed was far superior to his. Before Aubrey could leave the Buzz Merchant Guild's sphere of influence, a cold shout came from behind him. Aubrey was aghast as he desperately began to cast the spatial shifting magic that he had yet to master. For a space archmage like Aubrey, his understanding of space magic could only be considered to be at the beginning of the path. He couldn't freely teleport over short distances like a space grand magus like Emma could. Rashly casting a magic that he hadn't mastered was a suicidal act. However, Aubrey had no other choice now. He understood that Hanshaw wasn't someone he could match up against. Since there was no hope of escaping with speed, he could only risk his life and use the spatial magic that he hadn't mastered yet. When a person was in desperate straits, they would always burst forth with some potential. Aubrey, who normally required 2 seconds to chant a magic incantation, actually managed to shorten the time of the incantation by 1 second at this time. Hanshaw hadn't even approached Aubrey when suddenly, a strong spatial fluctuation came from Aubrey's surroundings. Suddenly, the space shattered like glass. Aubrey let out a horrified howl as his body seemed to shatter into pieces like a broken mirror. When the space returned to normal, Aubrey had disappeared without a trace. Hanshaw abruptly stood in place. He had some misgivings about space magic. Rashly using a magic that he wasn't familiar with would sometimes result in even greater power than some orthodox space magic. This Aubrey was clearly in this situation. From Han Shuo's point of view, Aubrey's body and space had shattered at the same time. There must have been a problem with the magic, causing him to lose his life as well. Before the space returned to normal, if Han Shuo suddenly entered that area, it was very likely that he would be affected by the magic and wouldn't be able to leave. If he ended up falling into another space, then Han Shuo would really want to cry, but no tears would come out. It wasn't known whether Aubrey was dead or alive, but from Han Shuo's point of view, it was more likely that he would be dead than alive. Without wasting any time, Han Shuo directly went to Phoebe's side and grabbed Phoebe, hastily saying, "Let's go first. I reckon that Lawrence's side is the most dangerous." Phoebe was startled and delighted at the same time. She was startled because of what Han Shuo had said about Lawrence's danger. She understood that Lawrence was the most crucial person. This time, since Ashburn dared to make a move against her so brazenly, then Lawrence would most likely be in grave danger as well. Once Lawrence was killed, then first Prince Charles and Ashburn would be able to truly grasp the situation. Then, the only path left for her and Han Shuo would be to escape. She was delighted because Han Shuo clearly knew that Lawrence was in greater danger, yet he still came to rescue her first. This was enough to prove that her importance in Han Shuo's heart was far greater than anything else. This was because Lawrence's survival would bring more benefits and power to Han Shuo. Phoebe was truly moved that Han Shuo had come to rescue her first at such a crucial time. "What should we do with them?" Phoebe immediately agreed. Soon after, she looked at the bodyguards beside her, as well as some merchants from the Buzzed Merchant Guild, and asked Han Shuo, "Let them escape on their own. Don't worry, the remaining enemies will have no chance to make a move against my undead creatures." Han Shuo hastily instructed. "Miss, you should leave first. We know what to do." The bodyguard leader hastily expressed his stance to Phoebe. Phoebe hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right then. Be careful and leave quickly." Han Shuo didn't waste any more words. He picked up Phoebe by the waist and flew towards Lawrence's current residence. "Bastard, how can you do this in front of so many people?" Phoebe was picked up by Han Shuo by the waist. Smelling the familiar scent on Han Shuo's body, her tender and charming face flushed red as she berated him in embarrassment. "What does it matter? In any case, they all know that you're my woman," Han Shuo casually replied, clearly not embarrassed in the slightest. You still dare to say that? I still haven't forgiven you." Phoebe resentfully rolled her eyes at Han Shuo, still fuming as she spoke. "Let's talk about this later. Don't talk anymore. We have to find Lawrence quickly. If Lawrence is really dead, I will take you and leave Asen City immediately. We will return to Bretel City as soon as possible," Han Shuo said in a deep voice. "Brian, it seems that you don't care about Lawrence's life or death at all, right?" Phoebe looked at Han Shuo in astonishment, somewhat puzzled. "No, I'm just stating the facts. If I didn't care about Lawrence's life or death, I wouldn't be going to save him now." "All right, don't talk anymore," Han Shuo casually replied. His speed suddenly increased as he flew towards Lawrence's residence at lightning speed. Ever since Han Shuo knew that Lawrence had deliberately befriended him with ulterior motives, he no longer treated Lawrence as a true friend. The far-sighted Lawrence did everything for his own benefit. Han Shuo understood this in his heart, and didn't harbor any resentment towards Lawrence's actions. However, it was impossible to say that Han Shuo didn't have a bit of grudge in his heart. It was just that Han Shuo's and Lawrence's interests were now firmly tied together. The two of them had become grasshoppers on the same string. Only when Lawrence ascended the throne would Han Shuo be able to obtain the greatest amount of benefits. Although this kind of relationship was maintained purely based on benefits, it wouldn't be mixed with too many personal feelings. It could only be said that Han Shuo saving Lawrence was all for his own benefit, and not because of his personal feelings towards Lawrence. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't have too many feelings towards Lawrence's life or death. That was why his expression was so indifferent when talking about Lawrence's life or death. Before arriving at Lawrence's residence, the soaring fire could be seen from afar. On such a night without moonlight, the fire in Lawrence's residence was truly too conspicuous. There were a few noble mansions surrounding Lawrence's mansion, but those mansions were as peaceful as usual. Their doors were tightly shut, and not a single person walked out to take a look. It was as if they had suddenly become blind and deaf, turning a blind eye to the activity within Lawrence's mansion. Each and every one of them seemed to have sunk into the deepest sleep. When Han Shuo swept past those eerily quiet mansions, the mystical demons circled around in the air and suddenly discovered that those seemingly quiet mansions were similarly filled with panic. However, under the stern reprimand of the masters inside, not a single person dared to make a sound. Not a single person walked out of the mansions to take a look out of curiosity. Such was the hypocrisy of the world. The nobles in these residences weren't part of Lawrence's faction. Most of them hadn't indicated which side they supported, which was why they were able to escape by a fluke. The old nobles were all people who knew what to do. They understood that in the entire Lancelot Empire, only Ashburn and eldest Prince Charles dared to make a move against Lawrence's residence. This power wasn't something they could contend against. Watching from the sidelines was the wisest decision. Rumble! A huge explosion sounded from within Lawrence's residence. Han Shuo could see tall and spacious houses collapsing with a loud rumble from afar. In the dusky sky, two golden shadows were extremely dazzling as they moved about on top of a few houses. Every time a golden light flashed, a house would collapse. Slender gullies would appear after the golden light flashed. The magic boundary that enveloped Lawrence's entire residence was continuously destroyed. Many servants on the periphery were stabbed to death by sharp weapons one after another. Corpses were strewn all over the ground. Some knights wearing brown, silver, and gray armor, as well as some mages wearing white, red, and black robes, surrounded Lawrence's residence from all directions. Among these people were experts under Ashburn, experts subdued by eldest Prince Charles, and experts sent by the Church of Light. When they were about to reach that area, a mystical demon finally took the lead and approached. Suddenly, he sensed two shadows moving about. One of them was actually Sacred Sword Master Corel, while the other was a golden-haired old man dressed in a knight's attire. This golden-haired old man held a golden spear in his hand. The golden armor on his chest had a design of an angel statue. The design of the angel statue was vivid and lifelike, and its wings seemed to be constantly flapping. A divinity temple knight with an angel statue on his chest was the symbol of one who had been blessed by the god of light. Every divinity temple knight with an angel statue had terrifying strength comparable to a sacred knight. If this divinity temple knight was a sacred knight, then his strength would be even more terrifying. However, this kind of divinity temple knight was extremely rare within the Church of Light. Under normal circumstances, they definitely wouldn't leave the God of Light's hall easily. It was rumored that only when an evil heretic that blasphemed the God of Light appeared would these extremely rare divinity temple knights leave and replace the God of Light to punish that great heretic. Han Shuo didn't expect to actually see one in the Lancelot Empire. His heart was filled with astonishment. The golden spear in this divinity temple knight's hand overflowed with strands of golden light. Waves of incomparably sacred aura spread out, giving Han Shuo an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Golden fighting aura was something that only sacred knights and sacred sword masters could possess. This divinity temple knight being able to release golden fighting aura meant that he himself was a sacred knight. Once this kind of powerful existence obtained the blessings of the God of Light, their strength would be frightening. Han Shuo only took one look and started to faintly worry for Sacred Sword Master Corel. With so many experts besieging Lawrence's mansion, Han Shuo naturally wouldn't be so stupid as to forcibly barge in. He hastily summoned the Earth Elite Zombie and opened up a passageway leading to the center of Lawrence's mansion. He then brought Phoebe and drilled in. Chapter 413. Phoebe's mind was full of questions as she looked at the large hole in the solid ground in front of her. Her bright eyes focused on the Earth Elite zombie who was opening the path in front of her. The Earth Elite zombie moved forward. Even the most skilled pangolin couldn't have the ability to split open the Earth like him. The Earth in front of him automatically shrank and scattered, opening up a continuously extending tunnel at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Earth Elite zombie easily walked through. What kind of Earth magic is this? Phoebe, who was following closely behind Han Sho, couldn't resist her curiosity after watching for a while. She looked at Han Sho with a face full of astonishment. It has nothing to do with magic, Han Sho replied. He furrowed his brows in thought and reluctantly explained. In fact, this is somewhat similar to the martial arts I practice. It's an existence that doesn't belong to the realm of fighting aura or magic. Phoebe's smooth jade-like chin stretched, her cherry lips wide open in shock. She blankly looked at Han Sho and said, Apart from those two women, it seems that you're hiding a lot of things from me. Not at all. It's just that it's not easy to explain because the martial arts I practice is completely different from your magic and fighting aura. Moreover, it's a bit complicated. Even if I explain it, you might not understand. Han Sho answered with a wry smile and tightened his grip on Phoebe's small hand. Somewhat angrily rolling her eyes at Han Sho, Phoebe inwardly told herself that she had to keep an eye on him in the future. This guy was originally very lustful and simply couldn't resist temptation. Once he met a beautiful woman, he couldn't help but have some crooked thoughts. If this continued, who knew how many love debts he would incur? All right, we're here. Pay attention, don't let your imagination run wild. As Phoebe silently pondered, Han Sho suddenly yelled in a serious tone, his gaze looking towards the slope. The Earth Elite zombie stood there motionlessly. When Han Sho and Phoebe approached, he turned to look at Han Sho and sent a message. Father, should we immediately open the entrance to the top? At some point in time, Little Skull, Earth, Wood, Fire, and Water Elite zombies all started calling Han Sho father. At first, Han Sho was extremely uncomfortable, but he slowly got used to it. The words, father, leapt into Han Sho's heart, giving Han Sho a new feeling. It was as if these 5 undead creatures that Han Sho had refined from the other world had truly become his flesh and blood. It actually gave Han Sho a feeling of affection. If he didn't communicate with these 5 creatures for a period of time, Han Sho would feel a faint longing and worry, fearing that something would happen to them in. Let's wait a moment, Han Sho replied. Shortly after, he turned to Phoebe and said, The exit is above. We're currently below Lawrence and the others. Let's not rush to go up immediately, lest Lawrence and the others attack us recklessly without knowing the situation. You stay here for the time being, I'll see if I can help your master. My master, what happened to my master? Han Sho was able to observe the situation through the mystical demons, but Phoebe naturally didn't have this ability. After hearing Han Sho's words, she asked in puzzlement. He's met with some trouble. Han Sho explained. How is that possible? My master is a sacred sword master, what kind of trouble could he encounter? Phoebe had a kind of blind trust in Corel. She asked Han Sho with a light smile, without any trace of nervousness in her expression. Your master is currently battling with a temple knight of the Church of Light. He's a sacred knight of the Church of Light. Apart from cultivating fighting aura, this sacred knight has also received divine blessings. Han Sho explained to Phoebe with a grave expression. Phoebe's charming face suddenly changed. She obviously knew some things about the Church of Light and hastily cried out. How is that possible? My master once said that the number of such powerful temple knights in the Church of God of Light can be counted on one hand. Why would he leave the Temple of God of Light? I don't know either, Han Sho replied. Shortly after, he furrowed his brows and thought to himself, could it be because of a heretic like me? Then hurry up and make your move. I don't wish for my master to be harmed. Although I understand my master's strength, there have always been all kinds of legends on the continent about the powerful temple knights of the Church of Light. These legends all describe the strength of such characters. I can't help but worry for my master." Phoebe had an anxious expression and began to worry for her master. Han Shu nodded and retreated to the rear with the Earth Elite Zombie. Above their heads, Sacred Sword Master Karel and the Sacred Knight of the Church of Light were constantly exchanging blows. One house after another collapsed with a loud rumble. Deep ravines appeared on the ground where the sword rays passed by. The enormous energy from the two spread out. Everyone in the surroundings did their utmost to avoid being affected by the shockwaves. Through the two mystical demons, Han Shu could clearly see the exchange of blows between the two above his head. Han Shu, who was underground, was constantly moving through the tunnels that the Earth Elite Zombie had opened up. He would always linger around the Sacred Knight's resting place, preparing to launch a sneak attack at the right moment. The golden-haired elder wielding the golden long spear looked like a moving piece of gold from afar. The golden armor on his body was incomparably sturdy. When he brandished his long spear, golden light shone brilliantly. In this dusky night, it was extremely eye-catching. Carol's white hair fluttered in the wind and his expression was grave. Every time he extended his long sword, a cross-shaped slash would explode out. This time, it was clear that Karel had used his full strength in his battle against the Sacred Knight. Regardless of the volume, or the power contained in each cross-slash, it was much stronger than the last time he fought against Han Shu. Those cross-slashes were like flying scythes, shattering rocks and collapsing houses wherever they passed, destroying everything in their path as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The Sacred Knight's expression was solemn as he chanted a song of faith to the God of Light. The armor on his body was as hard as a diamond under the protection of divine power. Every thrust of his spear was filled with golden light and interweaved with a bizarre divine aura, causing the cross-shaped slashes flying towards him to explode into specks of light. The battle between the two apex experts caused a terrifying scene of mountains collapsing and the earth splitting in Lawrence's mansion. None of the experts in the surroundings dared to approach, fearing that they would suddenly be torn to shreds by the fighting aura. During this process, even more soldiers and knights arrived from afar, surrounding Lawrence's mansion layer by layer. The situation on Lawrence's side was becoming more and more disadvantageous. The terrifying battle between the two experts above had greatly shocked Han Shu. Through the two mystical demons, Han Shu was able to clearly see each and every movement of the two. Only now did he suddenly realize that Karel had indeed not used his full strength back then. Otherwise, he would definitely have lost last time. While the two experts were fighting, Han Shu borrowed the Earth Elite Zombie's divine energy to rapidly travel underground, attempting to suddenly launch a fatal attack on the Sacred Knight. Han Shu faintly felt that the Sacred Knight's target might be him. Although it was somewhat despicable to launch a sneak attack while the other was attacking, Han Shu couldn't care less. Under the effect of the Earth Elite Zombie, many crisscrossing tunnels had already appeared in the depths of the earth. Han Shu used the mystical demons to observe the direction of the battle between the two while constantly shuttling back and forth. He was ready at any moment to suddenly emerge from underground and teach the Sacred Knight a painful lesson when he was careless. Karel, I think you should retreat at the critical moment. The current situation isn't something you can control by yourself. As a good friend of many years, I really can't bear to see your end. As long as you give up on Lawrence, I, Dempus, dare to guarantee that you will be able to enjoy your old age in peace. Apart from Lawrence, all your disciples will be safe and sound. In the distance, a gray-haired old magus in his twilight years suddenly sighed. His voice wasn't loud, but it resounded in every corner of Lawrence's mansion. Han Shu, who had been closely watching the Sacred Knight's footsteps, naturally also heard the words of this old magus called Dempus. He couldn't help but separate a mystical demon to pay attention to this old magus. Clang! A ball of dazzling golden light blossomed from the source of the sound, appearing like a glaring sunlight in the pitch-black night sky. However, the strong light only lasted for a moment. Dempus, you old thing! You clearly know of Astrologer Grace's prophecy, yet you still dare to disregard the future of the Lancelot Empire. Do you know that you will become the eternal sinner of the Lancelot Empire? Corel, who had landed after exchanging blows with the Sacred Knight, glared at Dempus and angrily berated him. To the divine eye of God of Light, mere astrology is just an unorthodox sorcery. Corel, you are an outstanding opponent, but it's a pity that you have gone astray and refused to come to your senses. Those who go against the God of Light definitely won't have a good ending. The Sacred Knight landed on a broken roof and sighed. Han Shuo was currently below the Sacred Knight. However, the Sacred Knight wasn't fighting intensely with Corel at this time. If Han Shuo were to launch a sneak attack now, he definitely wouldn't be able to achieve the desired result, and might even be injured by the Sacred Knight. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't act rashly. Corel, I know that Lawrence is your disciple, but he is only an illegitimate child. This kind of person definitely cannot become the new emperor of the Lancelot Empire. You should just give up on him. I'm getting a little impatient. If you still refuse to come to your senses, I can only personally take action, the old magus said helplessly. In the distance, Lawrence's expression was extremely ugly. He looked at the old magus who kept on calling him an illegitimate child. His eyes flashed with an ominous glint, as though he couldn't wait to rush up and tear the old magus into pieces. You dare? Corel angrily shouted, raising his long sword as he charged at the old magus. You won't be able to pass, the Sacred Knight standing on the roof said with a smile. He brandished the golden spear in his hand and once again blocked Sacred Sword Master Corel. With the two of them as the center, dazzling golden light once again shot out in all directions. Since you insist on protecting that illegitimate child, then, old friend, I'm very sorry to tell you that I won't drag this on any longer, the old magus said helplessly from afar, taking out an earthen yellow magic staff embedded with many shattered gems from his space ring. Dense earth element suddenly boiled from the depths of the earth and surged towards the old magus from all directions. He hadn't even chanted any magic incantations, yet he actually had such a powerful magic element gathering force. This caused Han Shuo's expression to suddenly change. Dempus? Earth's sacred magus Dempus Gale? Han Shuo suddenly reacted. He furrowed his brows and hesitated for a moment before immediately ordering the Earth Elite Zombie to quickly head towards Earth's sacred magus Dempus Gale's location. Although that Sacred Knight was similarly a huge threat, this Earth's sacred magus Dempus, who had nothing better to do, might be able to kill Lawrence and his group with a large area of effect spell. In the hands of this sacred magus, Earth magic might have many mystical restraining abilities towards the Earth. Han Shuo was worried that this person's existence would affect the Earth Elite Zombie's strength deep underground. He hastily gave up on keeping a close eye on the Sacred Knight, and rushed towards Dempus Gale's location without a care for anything else. The boundless power of the Earth! Dempus Gale solemnly chanted an incantation while holding a magic staff. Dense earth element boiled in the depths of the earth, and slight tremors gradually formed. Han Shuo, who was already deep underground, could clearly feel the sudden increase in power from the earth. Han Shuo carefully concealed the presence on his body, not touching a single bit of earth, as he flew towards Dempus Gale. Due to the omnipresence of earth element in the depths of the earth, Han Shuo was worried that his touch would be detected by Dempus Gale, who was concentrating on releasing earth magic. As the beloved of the Earth Elite Zombie had the same power as the Earth. He himself could be seen as the thick Earth, so Han Shuo wasn't the least bit worried that the Earth Elite Zombie would be discovered. Father, the Earth is changing. My current strength is still unable to stop this change, but I can change its direction. Do you want me to change its direction? Just as Han Shuo was rushing towards Dempus Gale, the Earth Elite Zombie suddenly sent him a message. Han Shuo blanked and hastily asked, "What do you mean?" "The power contained in the earth will form a huge earthquake and tear the earth into many holes. I have no way to stop this situation from happening, but I can change the location of the earthquake and change the direction of this change," the Earth Elite Zombie honestly transmitted. Han Shuo was only stunned for a second before he became ecstatic and said, "Very good. Change the location of the earthquake and release it around that old fellow. Yes, it's the place where the crowd is the most concentrated." When he was overjoyed and gave the Earth Elite Zombie the order, Han Sho had already arrived at the bottom of Earth's sacred Magus Dempus Gale's feet with the Demon's Lair edge. He callously condensed demonic yuan and stabbed upwards with the Demon's Lair edge. Chapter 414. With my will as the guide, Earth Splitter! After a lengthy prelude, Earth's sacred Magus Dempus finally finished chanting the complete incantation for the Earth Splitter. Suddenly, sacred Magus Dempus frowned slightly. He felt that the flow of the earth element in the depths of the earth was somewhat uncontrollable. This was a situation that had not occurred in the past 10 years, causing him to vaguely think that he was getting old. Could it be that he had chanted the incantation incorrectly? Just as Dempus was in a daze, he suddenly sensed a soaring baleful aura coming from the bottom of his feet. This soaring baleful aura did not have any concealment. The moment he sensed it, it tore through the hard rock and stabbed towards him like an indestructible sharp sword. Frightened, Earth's sacred Magus Dempus no longer had the leisure to correct the Earth Splitter that had gone out of control. All of his attention was focused on the sudden danger. That surge of killing intent that tore through the rocky ground was blood-red in color, and was stabbing towards his feet like a waterfall. Dempus cried out in his heart, and hurriedly rose from the ground, using the levitation spell to fly towards the sky. At the same time, Dempus hastily chanted the earth armor, the earth defensive spell. Dense earth element frantically gathered on his body from all directions. A grayish-brown armor formed from the condensation of the dense earth element instantly covered Earth's sacred Magus Dempus body. He also released a 10-fold gravity spell that only shrouded the area around his feet. Han Sho, who was flying at lightning speed, suddenly felt the pressure increase 10-fold when the Demon's Lair edge was about to pierce Dempus' feet. His speed of soaring into the sky unknowingly slowed down for a moment. Han Sho promptly made a decision and frantically poured his demonic yuan into the Demon's Lair edge while his body abruptly descended. Under the infusion of Han Sho's demonic yuan, the Demon's Lair edge suddenly flew out with thousands of blood rays. It was no longer affected by the gravitational force after a moment of hesitation in the air, blasting towards Earth's sacred Magus Dempus with the blood ray of 10,000 cuts. Dempus' expression was aghast. In his haste, he did not have the time to chant another earth magic spell. Without hesitation, he smashed the magic staff in his hand down with all his might. The magic staff in his hand was similarly condensed with dense earth elements, becoming as hard as the most solid diamond. Amidst the ear-piercing sounds of metal clashing, Dempus' magical staff was shattered into pieces by the Demon's Lair edge. The Demon's Lair edge, which had finally become an arrow at the end of its flight, still persistently bombarded Dempus' body, enveloping Dempus, who was covered by the earth armor, before finally releasing its remaining energy into Dempus' body. Dempus' earth armor did not have any damage, but the strands of cold air within the Demon's Lair edge had penetrated through the earth armor's physical defense and directly entered Dempus' old body. Earth's sacred Magus Dempus shuddered as his eyebrows suddenly froze. Beside Dempus, some of the experts who had followed him over only reacted at this moment. In an instant, all kinds of magic and weapons bombarded the Demon's Lair edge. The Demon's Lair edge slithered forward like a python, evading most of the attacks before suddenly disappearing into the ground. Rumble! At the same time, an earth-shaking rumble suddenly came from beneath their feet. The knights and soldiers standing on the ground all lost their balance, and began to sway from side to side. All of a sudden, hundreds of earth spikes burst out from the ground like sword rays, piercing some of the knights and soldiers who were caught off guard and killed them. Amidst the violent rumbles, the ground suddenly split open with many large and small ravines. The bottomless ravines swallowed dozens of lives. For a moment, the area with Dempus as the center had become the main area to withstand the effects of the Earth Splitter spell. Amidst the rumbles, people were continuously killed by this astonishingly powerful earth magic. Dempus, who had the cold air invading his body, could feel the chaotic cold air in his body. He felt that his body had turned from spring to winter. His hands and feet suddenly became somewhat stiff and numb. He was so cold that cold air was emitting from his entire body. His hair and eyebrows were actually showing signs of freezing. Dempus had obviously also discovered the abnormal movements that were impossible to appear beneath his feet. Unfortunately, Dempus, whose hands and feet had turned cold due to the cold air, was unable to suppress the abnormality beneath his feet. He could only tremble as he watched his Earth Splitter spell cause huge casualties on his side. Lord Mage, what is going on? A temple knight of the Church of Light was pulled up from the abyss by a white-robed priest. He angrily looked at Dempus, who was floating in the air above his head, and reprimanded. Kaka. Dempus was very anxious as he tried to explain that this wasn't his fault. Unfortunately, the only thing that came out of his mouth was this kind of trembling sound. Lord Mage, are you too old? You can actually release such a crucial spell wrongly. Do you know how many experts we have lost because of this wrong spell of yours? Another white-robed priest of the Church of Light similarly had a furious expression. Sacred Sword Master Corel, who was rapidly charging over, suddenly sensed the abnormality at Dempus' side midway. His heart was filled with doubts. After a few cross slashes forced the Sacred Knight to retreat, Corel frowned as he looked at Dempus from afar. Suddenly, he seemed to have understood something. He immediately abandoned the Sacred Knight and turned around to rush towards Lawrence's side. The survivors beside Dempus, who were frantically cleaning up the mess, didn't have the leisure to care about Hans Shaw, who had once again dived into the ground. One by one, they pulled up their companions who were still struggling in the gully and helped treat the wounds of the survivors who had been stabbed by the earth spikes. Hans Shaw rapidly distanced himself from Dempus' area after his attack. The demon's lair edge returned to his hand. Unknowingly, Hans Shaw had arrived beneath the feet of the Sacred Knight from the Church of Light. Calmly observing the Sacred Knight through a mystical demon, Hans Shaw discovered that the Sacred Knight was looking at Dempus with a puzzled expression. He was frowning as though he was considering something. Hans Shaw held his breath and concentrated. He wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he used the mystical demon to observe every change in the Sacred Knight's expression from afar. He was looking for the most opportune moment to give the Sacred Knight a fatal blow. The Sacred Knight looked at Dempus with a puzzled expression. Suddenly, he seemed to have understood something. His puzzled expression turned into anxiety. The golden spear in his hand trembled as he rushed towards Dempus, as though he wanted to help Dempus disperse the cold air in his body. Hans Shaw, who had been waiting for the most opportune moment, suddenly used the same trick again when the Sacred Knight had just taken a step. He once again made use of the demon's lair edge's unstoppable sharpness to pierce through the ground towards the Sacred Knight's left foot that had yet to take a step. The boundless killing intent couldn't be concealed. The Sacred Knight's expression greatly changed as he immediately retracted his right foot. His right foot, which was mixed with divine energy and fighting aura, ferociously kicked towards the bottom of his foot. Hans Shaw's demon's lair edge had just pierced through the ground when a torrential force violently surged over. Rumble! The Sacred Knight stomped his right foot, and a large ball of golden light suddenly entered the ground. With his right foot as the center, a round pit suddenly appeared. Hans Shaw definitely didn't expect the Sacred Knight's reaction to be so quick. Before the demon's lair edge could stab into the Sacred Knight's left foot, the Sacred Knight had already retracted his right foot and exploded with a terrifying force. The soft ground suddenly became as heavy as a mountain under the force of that stomp, forcibly stopping Hans Shaw's sneak attack deep underground. Hee, Marquis Brian, I knew it was you! The Sacred Knight above laughed loudly. The golden spear in his hand trembled with hundreds of strands of golden light. He waved it for a moment before abruptly stabbing it into the deep pit beneath his feet. Suddenly, needle-like fighting aura pierced through the ground and shot towards Hans Shaw at high speed. Those strands of golden fighting aura contained a sacred aura that Hans Shaw loathed immensely. With a speed that made it impossible for Hans Shaw to dodge, they arrived in front of Hans Shaw in an instant. Cursing loudly in his heart, Hans Shaw raised the demon's lair edge in his hand to form a black screen formed from demonic yuan to defend against the hundreds of strands of fighting aura. His body hastily deployed a protective shield to form a second layer of defense against the hundreds of strands of golden light. The hastily formed black screen shattered like an eggshell when the 57 strands of golden light arrived at the same time. The remaining dozens of strands of golden light pierced Han Sho like golden lightning. Han Sho only felt as if his body had been continuously pierced with steel needles dozens of times. His incomparably tough body couldn't withstand it, and he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The protective shield dimmed. Han Sho looked as if he had been pierced dozens of times by arrows. Dozens of finger-sized bloody holes suddenly appeared on his body. Even his forehead had 3 bloody holes, completely destroying Han Sho's handsome face, making him appear incomparably terrifying. "Kid, I knew you were up to no good. I was waiting for your sneak attack. Hee, you're still a bit too inexperienced." The Sacred Knight's laughter came from above. He flicked the spear in his hand and prepared to attack Han Sho again. This was the first time Han Sho had failed like this since he started cultivating. He cursed the Sacred Knight's 18 generations of ancestors in his heart. He knew that his premeditated sneak attack had been seen through long ago, and that he had ended up in a situation where he tried to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Forcefully resisting the urge to charge out and fight it out with the Sacred Knight, Han Sho didn't wait for the Sacred Knight's next wave of attacks to arrive. He decisively returned along the path he had come from. Having cultivated the demonic arts to Han Sho's level, as long as his consciousness wasn't scattered and his demon infant wasn't destroyed, he would be able to recover no matter how great the damage to his body was. Therefore, Han Sho wasn't worried about his disfigured face. There were too many experts on the other side. Han Sho knew that he wouldn't be able to gain any benefits by forcefully going out. Although he was extremely unwilling, he had no choice but to retreat. The Earth Elite Zombie, who had just destroyed the Earth's sacred Magus Dempus's Earth Fisher, suddenly felt the boundless anger and resentment in Han Sho's heart. The Earth Elite Zombie, who was deeply affected, disobeyed Han Sho's orders for the first time. He actually forcibly escaped from the depths of the earth. Suddenly, thousands of earth spikes abruptly rose from the ground one by one. The earth was like a continuous stretch of forest, undulating up and down. While the Sacred Knight's body was unstable, the Earth Elite Zombie, who had been naive all along, recklessly charged at the Sacred Knight. Chunks of earth flew out from the earth and stuck to the Earth Elite Zombie's body. In an extremely short period of time, the Earth Elite Zombie was covered by tens of thousands of tons of earth. The Earth Elite Zombie had turned into a 10-meter-tall clay man. His original naive appearance could no longer be seen, as though he had merged with the earth. He ferociously stomped on the somewhat stunned Sacred Knight. "No!" Han Sho, who was deep in the earth, suddenly let out a heart-wrenching cry. Ignoring the bloody wounds on his body, Han Sho once again soared into the sky from the ground, anxiously charging at the Sacred Knight. However, before Han Sho could get close to the Sacred Knight, the golden spear in his hand suddenly shot out a dazzling golden light. The spear stabbed right at the foot of the 10-meter-tall clay man that the Earth Elite Zombie had transformed into. A torrential force suddenly erupted, all of it rushing into the Earth Elite Zombie's body. The Earth Elite Zombie's body, which was formed from mud, suddenly shone brightly after the golden light entered it. Soon after, large chunks of the mud covering its body fell off. The Earth Elite Zombie, which had returned to its original size, was struck by a beam of golden light and was suddenly sent flying backwards. A large chunk of the natural armor on its chest had caved in deeply. Han Sho's eyes were crimson red. He had never been as angry as he was now. Little Skull, the Fire Elite Zombies, and the Wood Elite Zombies in the other plane all sent a strong message that they wanted to descend to this plane. They wanted to join forces with Han Sho to viciously retaliate against the enemy who dared to harm Han Sho and the Earth Elite Zombie. Han Sho, who hadn't lost his mind, forcibly stopped Little Skull and the other's urgent desire. He watched as the Earth Elite Zombie actually struggled to charge at the Sacred Knight once again after falling into the ground to avenge him. Han Sho choked with sobs as he shouted, "Idiot!" Soon after, Han Sho ignored the Earth Elite Zombie's persistent desire and used the fastest speed in his life to chant a reverse magic incantation, forcibly sending the simple-minded Earth Elite Zombie back to the Netherworld. "Foolish undead creature, you are truly courting death!" The Sacred Knight chuckled as he looked at Han Sho. He pointed the golden spear in his hand at Han Sho and said, "This time, my target is you. Your strength is not bad. No wonder you were able to force Koss to retreat twice in a row. However, your good luck ends here." Han Sho had never hated a person as much as he did at this moment. All along, Han Sho's attitude towards the Church of Light had been to ignore them, taking passive measures to counterattack. It wasn't until the Earth Elite Zombie recklessly got injured for him that Han Sho truly made up his mind to fight to the death with the Church of Light. Han Sho's crimson eyes stared at the Sacred Knight, who had a relaxed and boastful expression. He panted violently, ignoring the blood flowing from the bloody holes on his body. Because of his agitation, blood was flowing from the 3 bloody holes on his nose and left cheek, making him look as sinister as a demon who had walked out from the depths of hell. "I will remember you. As long as I am alive, the Church of Light will never have a day of peace." Han Sho slowly spat out these words, pausing between each word. He then turned around and flew towards Corel using the demonic 9 heads technique. The space sacred magus of the Lancelot Empire, Sabakas, had appeared at an unknown time. He was currently drawing a teleportation array under Lawrence's feet. Apart from Sabakas, who was concentrating on drawing the teleportation array, everyone's gazes were focused on Han Sho. Phoebe's bright tears uncontrollably fell from her eyes, but she was firmly held down by Carol's hand, preventing her from attempting to fly towards Han Sho. Chapter 415. When the Sacred Knight who injured Han Sho saw Han Sho turn around and fly towards Lawrence, he hesitated for a moment, and didn't rashly chase after him. In the direction that Han Sho was flying towards, apart from Sacred Sword Master Corel, there was also Space Sacred Magus Sabakas. With 2 Sacred Rank experts there, before the Earth's Sacred Magus Dempus recovered, this Sacred Knight obviously had some misgivings. Since the Sacred Knight didn't dare to act blindly without thinking, the experts from the Church of Light and Prince Ashburn's side naturally wouldn't foolishly rush over and throw away their lives. Therefore, the group of people could only watch as Han Sho spoke ruthlessly and quickly flew towards Lawrence's side. By now, Lawrence's mansion had been completely destroyed by the battle between the 2 Sacred Rank experts and the Earth magic spell Shatter Earth. All that could be seen were collapsed houses and desolation everywhere. The servants and maids in Lawrence's mansion had all been massacred a step earlier. Currently, there were only less than 10 trusted aides by Lawrence's side. On the other hand, after the enemy had lost the Shatter Earth spell, they still had close to 400 experts of various professions with astonishing battle prowess. The sound of hooves gradually approached from the distance. It seemed that there were still reinforcements coming. Earth's Sacred Magus Dempus lightly exhaled. Wisps of purple light drifted out from his body, and a bone-chilling aura spread along with the purple light. Dempus was after all a Sacred Magus, and his proficiency in manipulating mental strength had already reached an extraordinary level. The invasion of the cold air for a moment could cool, or even freeze his body. However, once he recovered and used his mental strength to expel the cold air obviously wouldn't be able to take his life. Moreover, when the cold air from the demon's lair edge entered his body, he had already used magic to resist it twice. Only a few wisps of the dense cold poison had entered his body. A mage of his realm naturally wouldn't be so easily taken away by a few wisps of cold poison. After Dempus expelled the cold air from his body, there was still some lingering fear in his heart. Fortunately, he had reacted in time just now and had many experts by his side to protect him. Otherwise, if Han Sho had the opportunity to make another move while he was suffering from the cold poison, it was likely that his old life would have been lost. What a terrifying martial skill! Dempus was aghast in his heart as he looked at Han Sho, who was covered in wounds and had a sinister appearance, as he walked towards Lawrence. He thought to himself, could it be that astrologer Grace's prophecy that this person could bring new prosperity to the Lancelot Empire is true? Brian, are you all right? Phoebe struggled free from Carol's hands with all her might and rushed to Han Sho with teary eyes. Her tender little hands trembled as she caressed the terrifying bloody hole on Han Sho's face. It's nothing, don't worry. Han Sho cracked an ugly smile and comforted Phoebe, who was crying uncontrollably. He reached out and grabbed Phoebe's little hand that was touching the bloody hole on his cheek and walked towards Lawrence. Lawrence's expression was full of worry as he hurriedly said, "Healer, where's the healer?" "Dead, he's long dead." Dark Grand Magus Crowley, who had pledged allegiance to Lawrence, sighed softly and took out a medicine bottle. He passed it to Han Sho and said, "Quickly apply it on the wound." "Senior!" The old assassin Balans, who was beside Lawrence, had been staring deeply at Han Sho and softly called out at this moment. Balans wasn't young anymore and had seen all sorts of situations as an assassin. He didn't intentionally express his concern in front of Han Sho, but the murderous aura on his body became even denser. It was obvious that his target wasn't on Han Sho's side. "No need!" Han Sho smiled as he refused. However, his smile on that terrifying face didn't make one feel at ease. At least, Phoebe started to cry bitterly again. "There's really no need. My wound is no longer bleeding. The martial technique I train in is special. This kind of external injury that looks very serious won't have any substantial effect on me." Han Sho couldn't help but explain once again when he saw everyone anxiously trying to apply the medicine on his body. Hearing Han Sho's words, everyone couldn't help but seriously size up Han Sho with a belly full of doubt. All of their expressions suddenly froze. The wounds all over Han Sho's body, from the finger-sized bloody hole that was previously bubbling with blood, all of the fresh blood seemed to have frozen at the entrance of the hole. The scarlet-red muscle fibers on the wound wriggled like worms. The originally finger-sized bloody hole had actually shrunk to half its original size. Sacred Sword Master Corel, who was always calm and unperturbed, was somewhat doubting his own eyes. He subconsciously closed his eyes and opened them again, gazing at the bloody hole on Han Sho's body. It had really shrunk to half its original size. Carol's expression changed. With his torch-like eyes, he could clearly see that the bloody hole on Han Sho's body was the size of a pinky finger and was oozing scarlet blood. However, not only had the bleeding stopped, the bloody hole had also shrunk to the size of a chopstick. Han Sho had soared into the sky from the depths of the ground and sent that peculiar undead creature back to the other world before flying back to their side. All of this took less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes was roughly equivalent to one trance. Such an unimaginable transformation in such a short period of time, Corel couldn't help but be indescribably astonished. Balans's eyes burned with passion as he stared at the bloody hole on Han Sho's lower abdomen. This bloody hole near Han Sho's demon infant was now only the size of a toothpick and no longer as terrifying as it was at the beginning. Demonic arts! This was the might of demonic arts! Balans shouted in his heart. He who was about to cultivate the demonic arts suddenly felt his heartbeat accelerate, and the excitement in his heart became somewhat uncontrollable. "All right, you guys don't have to worry about me. I will recover very quickly. Now, we should think of how to block those people's attacks and buy enough time for Mr. Sabaka's." Han Sho turned his head to look at the restless enemies, and said calmly in a deep voice. Under Han Sho's reminder, everyone had discovered the abnormality on his body. Now that they heard him say these words with a calm expression, they suddenly understood that the current situation was far from good. Looking in the direction of the enemies, they suddenly discovered that the Sacred Knight and Earth's Sacred Magus Dempus were recklessly charging over. Space Sacred Magus Sabakas was the only one who didn't raise his head to look at Han Sho. At this moment, he was holding a magic staff with a tip as sharp as a pen and was carving a complicated space magic formation on the flat rock ground. This magic formation with a diameter of 3 meters had an irregular rhombus shape. Every time Sabacas drew with his magic staff, thin and long veined lines would appear. Strands of elemental energy flowed along the tip of the magic staff and disappeared into the veined lines. Sabacas, who was completely focused, had completely forgotten himself. In his eyes there was nothing else other than the magic formation beneath his feet. He simply didn't care about the movements outside. It was as if he wouldn't even frown if the heavens fell and the earth split apart. As a space sacred magus, no one could stop Sabacas if he wanted to leave alone. If Sabacas was willing, he could even bring 1 or 2 people along with him. Unfortunately, there were too many important people here and Sabacas couldn't disregard the lives and deaths of others. Thus, he could only use the magic transportation formation. The objective of the Sacred Knight and Earth's Sacred Magus Dempus, who were charging over, was obviously to stop Sabacas from completing the magic formation. With the advantage of numbers, they planned to get rid of everyone here once and for all, so as to avoid leaving behind endless troubles in the future. While Dempus was flying over, another magic staff actually appeared in his hand. He once again started chanting a lengthy magic incantation. His eyes were focused on Han Shuo, as if Han Shuo was his greatest enemy. "Pay attention, we must not let anyone disturb Sabacas," Sacred Sword Master Karel hastily instructed after recovering from his shock at Han Shuo's body. Usually, the strongest person in a team would be the leader. Karel's words made everyone on Lawrence's side focus their attention. They immediately surrounded Sabacas in a square formation, intending to fight for enough time for Sabacas. "Let's go!" Just as everyone was prepared to buy time for Sabacas, who had been concentrating on setting up the space magic formation, suddenly let out a light sigh. Everyone's expressions relaxed. Under Sabacas' guidance, Lawrence and the group with the weakest battle strength took the lead and stood inside the magic transportation formation. "Don't let them escape!" The Sacred Knight who was rushing over shouted from afar. "Meteor rain!" Dempus, who had been chanting earth magic, finished chanting. Suddenly, a rumbling sound came from above everyone's heads as several hundred meteors suddenly fell from the sky. It was easy to imagine what would happen if such a dense meteor rain fell in such a small area. The skeletal staff suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's hands. Thousands of bone spears shot into the sky like a rain of arrows. A bewitching white bone shield blossomed with malevolent beauty, blocking everyone's heads. A few mages simultaneously released defensive magic. Sacred Sword Master Karel raised his long sword and coldly looked above, ready to block the descending attack at any time. Squeak, squeak! As the meteors rumbled and smashed down, a peculiar sound came from the sky. Han Shuo raised his head and stared, discovering that a black hole had suddenly split open in the sky. It was as if a demon had opened its ghastly mouth, as if the sky had been torn apart by a black sack. That terrifyingly powerful meteor rain was swallowed by the black hole. The defensive measures that Han Shuo had taken out were completely useless. "All right, it's your turn." Space Sacred Magus Sabacas pointed at the space magic formation in front of him and said to the remaining Han Shuo, Karel, Chloe, and Phoebe. His expression was calm, without the slightest nervousness that one would expect in the face of danger. He was truly indifferent to favor or disgrace. Han Shuo stared blankly and looked at Space Sacred Magus Sabacas with some astonishment. At this moment, Sabacas no longer had his usual amiable smile. Instead, his focused face had become somewhat solemn. Han Shuo understood in his heart that the black hole that had swallowed the meteor rain was released by this old man. However, Han Shuo didn't hear Sabacas chanting an incantation earlier. This caused Han Shuo to be overwhelmed with shock, but at the same time, he understood that Sabacas was already able to release magic through telepathy. It seemed that even though they were both sacred magi, Sabacas' comprehension of the essence of magic should be higher than Dempus. "Let's go!" While Han Shuo was in a daze, Phoebe grabbed him and forcefully pulled him into the space magic transportation formation that Sabacas had set up. Before Han Shuo could react, Sabacas had already waved his hand to activate the transportation formation. A white light suddenly flashed and Hanshu and the others all disappeared. Only Space Sacred Magus Sabakas was left in the entire area. He stabbed the sharp root of the magic formation in his hand downwards, causing the space magic formation that he had painstakingly set up to suddenly shatter, its original appearance no longer visible. Dempus, I didn't expect that a person of your realm would actually do such a thing to rebel against the future of the Lancelot Empire. As a friend of many years, I feel pain for you. After destroying the space magic formation, Sabakas looked at Dempus, who had already arrived in front of him, and sighed, lamenting. I don't believe in that illusory prophecy. Letting that illegitimate child become the king of the Lancelot Empire is simply absurd. Not only me, but many of the nobles in the Empire will not allow this to happen. I have no choice but to do this for the sake of the Empire's future. The ones who are obstinate are you. You shouldn't have listened to the words of a muddle-headed astrologer and gambled the Empire's future on a heretic. That's an evil follower of the Calamity Church. How can he bring the future of the Lancelot Empire? Dempus righteously rebuked Sabakas. He was clearly someone who didn't believe in fate. Mr. Sabakas, I greatly respect you as a person and have also heard some of your legends. However, I still have to say that even if you rescue Lawrence and the others, you still won't be able to change their fates. The entire Asen city is currently under the control of the Duke and the eldest prince. They ultimately won't be able to escape. That sacred knight laughed heartily as he said this to Sabakas. That's not necessarily true. Sabakas calmly looked at the sacred knight and said in a deep voice. At least there's one place that you won't be able to easily control. The Dark Mantle headquarters was a place with even tighter defenses than the Imperial Palace. Even if the Imperial Palace was under their control, the Dark Mantle headquarters wouldn't be easily taken down. As a senior elder of the Dark Mantle, Sabakas was the one who implemented the defensive measures on Mt. Ordas. He clearly understood the powerful defensive capabilities of Mt. Ordas. It can't be denied that the Dark Mantle headquarters isn't something that outsiders can easily take down, that sacred knight said with a serious expression. Shortly after, he once again revealed a smile and said, However, if the internal situation starts to turn chaotic, then it's a different story. When these words were said, Space Sacred Magus Sabaka's expression changed in fright. He didn't continue speaking nonsense with them, and hurriedly waved his magic staff, disappearing in a streak of white light. Chapter 416. Mt. Ordas, Dark Mantle Headquarters. Sabaka's spatial magic array led to the Dark Mantle headquarters. However, when Hanshu's group arrived, they discovered that the situation at the Dark Mantle headquarters wasn't as stable as they had imagined. Mt. Ordas, which had the strongest defense in Asen City, had begun to fall into chaos from within. All kinds of tight defensive measures had been mostly destroyed. A group of Dark Mantle higher-ups who were inclined towards First Prince Charles, harboring some ulterior motives, had destroyed the Dark Mantle's defensive points within the headquarters. Of the 11 Dark Mantle higher-ups at the previous meeting, apart from the 3 heavyweights who firmly believed in the judgment of the 2 elders, 5 of them had secretly pledged allegiance to First Prince Charles. Impressively, they had retreated at the most crucial moment. Not only had they secretly destroyed the Dark Mantle's internal defensive points, they had also joined forces with the Empire's army to attack the Dark Mantle. The sudden internal changes had caused the heavily guarded Mt. Ordas to similarly become a land of chaos. When Hanshu's group entered the Dark Mantle headquarters through the magical transportation array, the various shouts and errors already proved that the situation here was similarly not optimistic. Someone has rebelled. Perhaps, they believe that Amis and the other 2 have stayed in their positions for too long and feel that they can replace them. In front of Hanshu's group, a large hole seemed to have been sliced open by a sharp weapon. Space Sacred Magus Sabakas walked out from within, speaking with a worried expression. The wounds on Hanshu's body continued to slowly shrink and close up under the nourishment of the magical yuan. The mystical demons roamed through the various tunnels of the Dark Mantle headquarters, slowly reflecting the situation here in his mind. At the foot of Mt Ordas, an army of 5,000 was stationed, surrounding the Dark Mantle headquarters layer by layer. The 5 upper echelons of the Dark Mantle that Han Shaw had seen last time had joined forces with Charles and Ashburn's forces and were currently attacking the Dark Mantle headquarters. These 5 people had destroyed various defensive points of the Dark Mantle from the start. They were very familiar with the internal situation of the Dark Mantle. The battle proceeded in an orderly manner under their command. As the mastermind behind the scenes of the Lancelot Empire, the Dark Mantle was still tenaciously withstanding the attacks despite the appearance of 5 traitors. Every member of the Dark Mantle headquarters was a true expert. Faced with the betrayal of their former comrades, the hatred in these people's hearts could not be suppressed. If not for the large number of enemies, these people would have already rushed out of Mt Ordas and skinned the 5 traitors. The 5,000 soldiers at the foot of the mountain is not a huge number. With our arrival, it should be easy to get rid of them. Han Shaw saw the situation clearly through the mystical demons and immediately frowned as he spoke to Space Sacred Magus Sabakas. Sabakas had a stunned expression, feeling astonished at Han Shaw's ability to control the overall situation. As the controller of space magic, Sabakas had gone to the outer perimeter to take a look before coming over. Only then did he understand the power surrounding Mt Ordas. He did not expect that Han Shaw would actually understand the surrounding situation after being transported to this area. Sabakas had heard too much about the miraculous abilities of Han Shaw from others. However, Sabakas, who had never seen it with his own eyes, clearly had his suspicions. It was only when he heard Han Shaw's words that he seriously looked at Han Shaw that he suddenly discovered that the bloody hole on his face had already completely healed, with no traces of injury visible. Grace's prophecy was indeed accurate. The appearance of such a miraculous person in the Lancelot Empire would indeed bring about a new future for the Lancelot Empire. It seems that there should be a way out of such a terrible situation. Sabakas thought inwardly. Those people are all soldiers of the Lancelot Empire. They were only ordered by Charles and Ashburn to attack Mt Ordas. As soldiers who only know how to obey the orders of their superiors, they are not at fault. The ones who are at fault are the ones who gave them the orders. After Sacred Sword Master Corel said this, he immediately looked at Han Shaw and said, "Therefore, as the core strength of the Lancelot Empire, they cannot be sacrificed innocently in this battle." After the mystical demons made a large circle, Han Shaw discovered that among the forces surrounding Mt Ordas, there weren't any powerful light mages that could pose a threat to his undead army. He had originally planned to use the undead army and Sabakas' space magic to resolve the crisis at Mt Ordas once and for all. However, he didn't expect to be rejected by Corel. Although Han Shaw's soul had descended into the Lancelot Empire, he wasn't truly a citizen of the Lancelot Empire. He didn't place much importance on the lives and deaths of these people, which was why he made this suggestion. However, Sacred Sword Master Corel had always viewed the future of the Lancelot Empire as his own responsibility, and was obviously unwilling to let those innocent soldiers die tragically under terrifying magic. "Let's find Candide and the others first, then we will think of another way," Sabakas said calmly. "There's no need to find them, they're coming," Han Shaw replied. Not long after Han Shaw said this, the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle as well as the remaining upper echelons that firmly supported Sabakas' decision all appeared in this area. "Grandfather, we sensed an abnormality in the transportation matrix here and saw your arrival through the magic mirror." Cecilia was the first to speak with a solemn expression. Emily was also among these people. It was obvious that her attention had been placed on Han Shaw from the start. The bloodstains on Han Shaw's body were still sticky and there were 2 extremely small holes on his chest that hadn't healed yet. Emily didn't need to think too much to know that Han Shaw was injured. Her eyes suddenly reddened and she really wanted to disregard everything and lean on Han Shaw like Phoebe. She wanted to personally take care of all the wounds on Han Shaw's body and asked him how his injuries were and if they were serious. Unfortunately, she was well aware of her status and also understood that this might cause trouble for Han Shuo. Under such an extremely unfavorable situation, Emily could only forcefully suppress the worry in her heart and use her gaze to vaguely express her worry and anxiety. Among this group of people, the one that Han Shuo was most concerned about was Emily. After Han Shuo had descended into the Dark Mantle headquarters and discovered that the Dark Mantle had also fallen into a tight encirclement, he had immediately started to use mystical demons to search for traces of Emily. He only truly relaxed after discovering that Emily was safe and sound. Emily's reddened eyes were enough to let Han Shuo understand the concern in her heart. He couldn't help but feel warmth in his heart. At this moment, Phoebe's small hand that was being held by Han Shuo formed the word calm in Han Shuo's palm. Soon after, Phoebe struggled free of Han Shuo's grip and walked towards Emily. Candide and Amis came over and respectfully saluted Sabacus. Soon after, Amis quickly explained the situation and finally said, "This time the disturbance came from within. It was indeed our negligence. However, it was fortunate that the true authority of the Dark Mantle has always been in the hands of the three of us. Therefore, although the headquarters was greatly damaged at the beginning, the situation was finally stabilized under the arrangements of the three of us." At this point, Amis, Candide and the others clearly understood the true situation. After Amis finished speaking, Candide said with a gloomy expression, "Those traitors were mainly in charge of gathering and transmitting information from His Majesty the King's palace. This time, the news of His Majesty the King's death wasn't leaked at all. It was precisely because we didn't prepare in advance that we ended up in such a passive situation. They must die!" Lawrence slightly shouted, enunciating each word. Lawrence, who had already grieved, now had an ice-cold expression. During this period of time, Uhtred had wholeheartedly encouraged and supported Lawrence, causing Lawrence to have extremely deep feelings for Uhtred. Lawrence, who was also a ruthless person, clearly understood that Uhtred's sudden death was inseparably related to Charles and Ashburn. Asen City has 4 city gates. The city guards at the north are controlled by Count Boris. I reckon that the north of the city is slightly safer now," Amis said with a grave expression. Nodding his head, Lawrence calmly said, "It's best for us to settle the rebellion within Asen City. Once we leave Asen City, Charles and Ashburn will be able to distort the truth. A large-scale war is definitely not an outcome I wish to see. In this way, even if we ultimately emerge victorious, the Lancelot Empire's strength will be greatly damaged." "That's right. It's best to settle the matter within Asen City. I'm afraid that this is also Ashburn and Charles's intention. Currently, the Lancelot Empire has powerful enemies outside its borders. Once the princes fall into internal strife due to seizing power, I reckon that the Lancelot Empire will really head towards destruction." Carell agreed with Lawrence's words and immediately expressed his position. "In that case, the fastest way to settle the rebellion is to get rid of Ashburn and Charles. As long as the two of them are dead, the leaderless Lancelot Empire will no longer be a threat. However, I'm afraid that it won't be that easy to carry out this matter. They are definitely aware of this point. I reckon that there will be many experts protecting Ashburn and Charles." Lawrence continued, "Let's not discuss this matter for the time being. Old Han and the others are at the north of the city. Other than him, your father and a few other marquises who are still alive are all within the castle of the Northern City Guard. For the time being, Ashburn and the others have yet to truly attack the north of the city. That place can become our main camp and we can discuss in detail there," Han Shuo suddenly said. Lawrence was somewhat startled when he heard this and asked, "They are all there?" Nodding his head, Han Shuo said with certainty, "That's right. Other than them, the second prince and the youngest prince, as well as the survivors under them, are also at the north of the city. Currently, the entire Asen City, other than the north of the city, is filled with Ashburn and the eldest prince's soldiers and knights. Only that place is temporarily safe." The 12 mystical demons were scattered in every corner of Asen City. The mystical demons that were constantly roaming around were able to clearly observe the entire situation in Asen City. Looking at the entire Asan city, no one could understand the situation in Asan city better than Han Shuo. The boastful Han Shuo was calm and natural, as though everything was under his control. Chapter 4:17. At such a crucial moment, it went without saying how useful a person who had an accurate understanding of the entire situation would be. Thus, when everyone discovered that Han Shuo was explaining the situation of the various districts of Asan City with great familiarity, they were momentarily stunned by Han Shuo's calm and natural performance. "Brian, how can you know the situation of the various districts of Asan City when you're here? After the appearance of those 5 traitors, many of the Dark Mantle's networks were destroyed. The 5 of them know the distribution of some of the Dark Mantle's main networks. Even the Dark Mantle can't easily grasp the situation of Asan City. Could it be that you can?" Sabaka stared blankly at Han Shuo, asking in astonishment after a while. Nodding his head, Han Shuo calmly admitted, "I can." When these words were said, everyone's expression was both surprised and delighted. However, the delight was clearly more than astonishment. If what Han Shuo said was true, then Han Shuo alone could accomplish the intelligence gathering and monitoring that the various Dark Mantle networks were originally responsible for. In the current incomparably chaotic Asan City, if Han Shuo could really understand the situation of every corner of Asan City, everyone would be able to make the correct judgment and seize the opportunity to reverse the current unfavorable situation. When the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, including the 2 sacred rank characters, heard Han Shuo say the 2 words, "I can," so confidently, their expressions became lifeless for a moment. They even forgot about the numerous experts surrounding them. While the few of them were indescribably shocked, Han Shuo seemed to think that they weren't shocked enough and continued to add, "Not only the situation of the 4 districts of Asan City, but even the conversation between Ashburn and Charles, as well as the implementation and details of every step they took, I can see all of it without missing a single detail. As long as I'm willing, I can clearly see any place in Asan City, other than those areas with layers of barriers. As long as I'm given some time, I'll know what they're doing and saying. What I said is true. For example, right now, Ashburn and Charles have gathered together to discuss how to take down the Northern District. Oh, they said that Count Boris has an officer called Bishop who's one of their men. What's wrong?" When Han Shuo was halfway through his speech, he suddenly noticed that everyone around him was staring at him in a daze. He couldn't help but ask curiously, Are you a god?" Dark Grand Magus Crowley, who had lost to Han Shuo last time, stared blankly for a moment before speaking out the thoughts of everyone with a respectful tone. "Are you a god?" The 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, Lawrence, the 2 sacred rank archmages, and even Balans, Emily, Phoebe, and the others suddenly realized that the words they wanted to say had been spoken in advance by this fellow. To be able to see every region of a city clearly without missing out any information he wanted to know, such an existence, other than a god, even a demigod, powerhouse could not do it. Could this guy in front of him be a hidden god who had fallen to the mortal world? Carrying this kind of doubt, everyone's gazes converged on Han Shuo's body, anxiously waiting for Han Shuo's explanation. Han Shuo naturally wasn't an idiot. His short moment of doubt was swept away by Crowley's "Are you a god?" He immediately understood what the 12 mystical demons that were everywhere signified to the people of this world. "No, this is a special effect that comes with the martial technique that I practice. It's nothing special." "Oh, that's right, Balance, I will impart this martial technique to you after some time. At that time, you will understand what's going on," Han Shuo hastily explained. When the sluggish Balance heard Han Shuo's words, he was so happy that he almost fainted. Fortunately, Balance hadn't lived in vain for so many years. He hastily stabilized his chaotic emotions and said with a trembling voice, "Thank you, senior brother! Thank you, senior brother!" Everyone's envious and jealous gazes instantly focused on the excited Balance. Even Sacred Sword Master Corel, whose heart was as calm as water, felt a little envious of Balin's. He thought that Balin's eyes were really sharp, to actually find such a mystical senior brother. I also want to learn. Phoebe's bright eyes fixated on Han Shuo's body as she said straightforwardly. Han Shuo was slightly startled. He shot a glance at Phoebe, coughed dryly, and pretended to be serious as he said, "The sex secret technique cannot be passed on to outsiders, not even to my wife." However, in his heart, Han Shuo thought, since you have a request for me, then I must properly grab hold of it. I can't easily agree. I must at least let you know your place. Phoebe, don't mess around. Sacred Sword Master Corel frowned as he berated Phoebe. Phoebe was most afraid of this teacher of hers. She resentfully glared at Han Shuo after hearing his words, and inwardly thought that when they were alone, no matter if she pestered him relentlessly or attacked him tenderly, she must definitely dig out this martial technique from him. I know, Bishop. I didn't expect him to be a traitor. We must immediately head to the northern part of the city and stabilize the situation there. Lawrence's heart was burning with impatience. He planned to first head to the northern part of the city where Boris was. Up until now, only the northern city guard was still under their control. You guys leave first, I'll seal off MT Ordas. One of the three heavyweights, Candide, hesitated for a moment before saying to everyone with a gloomy expression that never changed even after 10,000 years. Space Sacred Magus Sabacas hesitated for a moment after hearing Candide's words, then nodded and said, All right, it's good to seal off MT Ordas for the time being. At least after the northern part of the city falls, we can still temporarily hide in MT Ordas, or leave Asen City through the magic array on MT Ordas. Oh, fortunately, the authority of the Dark Mantle has always been in the hands of the three of you. Otherwise, if those fellows were to find out more of the Dark Mantle's secrets, I'm afraid we would really be in big trouble this time. From the conversation between Candide and Sabacas, Han Shuo understood that the Dark Mantle was still hiding many secrets. Han Shuo had never heard of sealing off the mountain. However, it seemed that the entire MT Ordas could be sealed off. The two of them said that the Dark Mantle headquarters could still be the last stronghold once the mountain was sealed off. This meant that the safety of MT Ordas after being sealed off should not be a problem. Candide, I'll leave this place to you for the time being. This is our badge. Amis held the badge that represented his identity, and solemnly handed it over to Candide. Be careful! The other member of the three heavyweights, Cecilia, similarly handed over the badge that represented her identity to Candide with a solemn expression. If MT Ordas is to be sealed off, it can only be activated with the identity badges of the three leaders. Once MT Ordas is sealed off, all the entrances and exits and the common magic array will be sealed. Apart from the few of us, anyone who doesn't know the method can forget about freely entering and leaving MT Ordas. Amis explained to Han Shuo, Lawrence, and the others. Even Han Shuo didn't know about this secret. When Han Shuo looked at Emily, he discovered that Emily also had a puzzled expression on her face. After carefully observing the surroundings, Han Shuo discovered that there were quite a few Dark Mantle higher-ups here. However, the ones who truly knew about this secret were probably only the three heavyweights and the four elders. From the looks of it, as the largest and most terrifying organization in the Empire, the secrets hidden by the Dark Mantle shouldn't be as little as what everyone had seen. Sealing off the entire MT Ordas was probably just the tip of the iceberg. After Amis finished explaining, everyone made a prompt decision. Taking advantage of the fact that MT Ordas had yet to be sealed off in Candide's hands, they used the existing transportation array here to directly reach the Dark Mantle's branch stronghold in the Northern City District. The Northern City District was similarly attacked. Han Shuo's mansion was here. However, compared to the other districts, the Northern City District was still considered safe. Those who attacked Han Shuo's mansion, regardless of whether they ultimately achieved their objective, had all left the Northern City District before the Knights of the Northern City Army arrived. Arriving at Boris's castle in the Northern City District, the powers that were inclined towards Lawrence gathered together. As Han Shuo could clearly see the distribution of Ashburn's forces and knew the details of their next steps, Han Shuo had become the most important person. Under Han Shuo's description, the distribution of Ashburn's and the eldest prince's forces, the secret movements of the various nobles, the current situation within the imperial palace, and the movements of the other two princes were all discovered by everyone. Within the extremely chaotic Asan city, Lawrence's side had someone like Han Shuo who could see through the entire situation. The benefits to Lawrence's side were quickly manifested. Under Han Shuo's guidance, the 12 traitors within the Northern City Guard, led by Bishop, were all executed over the next 2 days. Some of the nobles who had luckily escaped and rebelled against Ashburn were escorted into the castle by sacred magus Sabakas. 2 attacks against Ashburn and the others from the Northern City Guard were ambushed by a trap that had been set up beforehand. The leaders were killed on the spot. With Han Shuo's existence, Lawrence, Old Han, and the other military strategists were adept at using the power in their hands. Under the circumstances of not using their own side, they firmly defended the Northern City District. Furthermore, they slowly accumulated the power in their hands, forming the only power in Asan City that could threaten Ashburn and Charles. However, Ashburn, Charles, and the others' advantage was too great. Currently, 4/5 of Asan City was under their control. The power in their hands was also 4 times that of Lawrence and the others. The temporary victory of the Northern City Guard didn't seem to be enough to reverse the overall situation. On the 3rd day, when everyone was anxiously pondering on how to resolve this problem, Han Shuo suddenly discovered through the mystical demons that there was an iron-blooded army of 50,000 stationed at the Northern City Gate of Asan City. It was also on the same night that a skinny middle-aged man grabbed Fanny and scolded Han Shuo the entire way. He barged into the Northern City District's castle and brought new trouble to Han Shuo. Chapter 418. Tell that brat Brian to get out here. The skinny, middle-aged man dragged the reluctant Fanny into the castle, swearing and swearing all the way. The officers guarding the castle along the way all seemed to recognize this skinny middle-aged man. The people along the way all had distressed looks on their faces. Unexpectedly, no one dared to stop him. During these 3 days, due to the astonishing talent Han Shuo had displayed, Han Shuo's status within the castle was extraordinary. Even in Asan City, there was rarely anyone who dared to curse a great noble so arrogantly. Some soldiers who didn't know this person's identity were extremely furious. However, they suddenly calmed down after a few words of explanation from the seasoned soldiers. When they looked at this person again, their gazes actually carried traces of respect. Han Shuo and the others in the meeting hall on the 3rd floor of the castle had clearly heard that person's loud cursing. Among them, Old Han, Boris, Ibu, and the other nobles, Sacred Sword Master Karel, Sacred Magus Sabakas, and Amis of the Dark Mantle all had bitter smiles on their faces when they heard the voice of the person who had just arrived. Lawrence, Amis, and the others who understood the situation suddenly looked at Han Shuo with flickering gazes. Emily felt even more uneasy. She didn't know what kind of unpredictable outcome this man's arrival would bring to the people here. Why is this fellow here? Old Han's expression suddenly changed. Soon after, he looked in astonishment at the bitter smile on Han Shuo's face and probed. Why do you have a grudge against him? Han Shuo awkwardly scratched his head and explained with a bitter face. I don't have a grudge against him. Forget it, I'll deal with it when the time comes. I'll go take a look. Just as Han Shuo stood up and walked out, Lawrence suddenly spoke with a strange expression. Brian, you can't provoke this man. You must treat him with caution. I'll take note. Han Shuo replied and walked straight out the door. Lawrence also understood Han Shuo's temperament. After thinking for a while, he still didn't feel reassured, so he got up and followed them. Those seated here were all people of status. Some of them even had some friendly relations with Firenze. Upon seeing Lawrence get up and leave, they hesitated for a moment before leaving one after another, with the exception of Space Sacred Magus Sabakas and Sacred Sword Master Karel. In the entire Lancelot Empire, if there was one person that Grand Duke Ashburn and eldest Prince Charles feared, it would be the war god of the southern border, Firenze. In the entire Lancelot Empire, there was only one person who could suppress the orcs who were eyeing the southern border covetously. The people of the dozens of cities in the southern border were incomparably valiant. In the many years of war with the Orc Empire, every soldier and knight had been tempered to become extremely powerful. The strongest knight corps in the entire Lancelot Empire were all located in the southern border. Without the existence of this person, the vast southern border would become a pasture for the orcs. The Lancelot Empire would also be invaded by the barbaric orcs. It could be said that regardless of who the ultimate beneficiary of the coup in Asen City was, Firenze's position in the southern border would not be affected in the slightest. The reason was none other than because other than a madman like him, there was no one else who could stabilize the situation in the southern border. Just based on this point alone, he had become the most skillful person. During such a time of internal strife, if this person wanted to, he could completely separate the southern border from the Lancelot Empire and become the true emperor of the southern border. "Where's that little bastard? Get out here!" Firenze scolded loudly along the way. None of the densely packed soldiers in the surroundings dared to stop him, taking the initiative to make way for him. "Father!" Fanny, who was grabbed by Firenze, blushed, as if she was ashamed to have such a father. "Don't worry about it. That little bastard is already a playboy by nature at such a young age. I must teach him a lesson today. I don't care if he is the city lord of Bretel City or not. If he provokes me, I will start a war with him first. The Lancelot Empire is not chaotic enough anyways. It doesn't matter if I add some fuel to the fire." Firenze's anger soared to the heavens as he pulled Fanny up to the second floor. At the beginning, when Fanny mentioned Brian's identity, Firenze was rather appreciative. He had also heard of some of Hansho's deeds and felt that this kid was quite to his liking. He thought that this marriage was justifiable, and that Fanny marrying him would not be a disgrace to her family. However, he was somewhat unhappy that Hansho stood him up time and time again. This time, he had clearly arrived at Asen City, but Hansho still did not take the initiative to pay his respects. This made Firenze somewhat angry. However, he could still reluctantly accept that the situation in Asen City was indeed somewhat complicated. However, when he began to use his power to understand Hansho, he suddenly discovered that Hansho and Phoebe of the Bus Merchant Guild were actually lovers. This was no small matter. When Firenze, who was far away from Asen City, found out about this matter, he naturally thought that Hansho had deceived his daughter's feelings. He almost directly rushed to Hansho's mansion to start a big fight. Forcefully restraining the impulse in his heart, Firenze found Fanny and interrogated her. After the interrogation, he discovered that not only did Fanny know about that kid's lousy affair, she even coyly said that she was willing and said that she was not calculative, in front of him. This made Firenze so angry that he almost fainted. Following that, Fanny even mustered up her courage and said that Hansho had another woman called Emily apart from Phoebe. This time, Firenze really started to go berserk. Without saying anything further, he dragged Fanny over to settle the score with Hansho. I am. Hansho stood on the stone steps leading from the second floor to the third floor. He looked at Firenze, who was walking over with a flushed face and cursing all the way. Hansho's heart was perturbed, but he could only helplessly say this. "Brat, you still dare to come out? Not bad, not bad." Firenze gnashed his teeth. He casually snatched a spear from the hands of a nearby guard and shot it at Hansho. This spear was like a dazzling silver lightning, arriving in front of Hansho in the blink of an eye. Firenze was extremely good at leading troops and was a Sky Knight himself. This attack contained fighting aura and its momentum was not to be underestimated. Hansho had long since known that Firenze wouldn't let the matter rest. He raised his left hand and the demon's layer edge burst out from his palm. With a clang, it collided with the tip of the spear, shattering the spear inch by inch. "Father! You said you wanted to have a good talk. Fanny grabbed Firenze with both hands, loudly berating him, while helplessly looking at Han Sho. She repeatedly winked at Han Sho. Isn't this a good talk? If not, why would I have come here alone? This brat could get rid of Leah Kane, and there are so many old farts here protecting him. If I didn't come here to have a good talk, then what is a good talk? Firenze turned around and glared at Fanny, lightly scolding. Lass, let go of me. I want to have a good talk with him. Old Han, Amis, and the others had just walked to Han Sho's side when they were scolded by Firenze's. So many old farts. Old Han was furious. He pointed at Firenze and angrily rebuked. You lunatic, who are you calling old farts? I'm not scolding you. Firenze snorted with a cold face. Old Han's expression relaxed. Just as he was about to stop pursuing the matter, he was almost angered to death by Firenze's next words. I'm scolding all of you. Don't think that I won't know he's inside just because he didn't come out. Firenze sneered as he looked at old Han's relaxed expression before decisively adding on. Han Sho blankly stared at Firenze. He thought to himself that this guy really had a personality. It seemed that someone who dared to beat up Grand Duke Ashburn in court was indeed not an ordinary person. Mother Fasterus cur, you mad dog. When did I offend you? Old Han rarely got angry these past few years. However, upon seeing Firenze, he was infuriated to the point of even cursing. Your wife snatched my daughter's man. And Carol's disciple also snatched my daughter's man. Mother Fasterus cur, are you bullying me because I'm in the southern border and can't do anything here? That's why all of you are bullying an honest person like me. Firenze was indeed like what old Han said. He was like a mad dog scolding whoever he caught. When these words were spoken, Emily's charming face immediately turned deathly pale. Han Sho's heart also trembled, thinking that this was going to be fun. As expected, old Han's expression suddenly sunk. He looked coldly at Firenze and said, What do you mean? Tell me clearly. If you dare to slander my family, I'll pursue this matter even if it costs my life. Unknowingly, Sacred Sword Master Karel and Sabakas had also walked out from inside. Karel glared at Firenze and shouted, What do you mean? The Empire is in chaos now. How long are you going to cause trouble for? This brat already has those two girls, Phoebe and Emily, yet he still dares to provoke my daughter. Don't you know that? Firenze didn't fear old Han and Carol's fury at all as he sneered and said these words. After pausing for a moment, as if he felt that he hadn't caused enough trouble, Firenze coldly added, I will definitely pursue this matter. Before this matter is resolved, the internal strife of the Empire has nothing to do with me. You can cause trouble however you like. Whoever lives or dies has nothing to do with me. Mother Fasterus cur, even if the Lancelot Empire is finished, I won't allow anyone to bully my daughter. If you guys want to play, I'll accompany you to the end. When these words were spoken, everyone's gaze wandered between Han Sho, Fanny, Emily, and Phoebe. Old Han and Carol's faces were ashen. On one hand, they were dumbfounded by the sudden turn of events. On the other hand, they were shaken by Firenze's reckless words. Regardless of whether it was old Han or Karel, they had devoted their entire lives to the Lancelot Empire. To them, the Lancelot Empire's future was what they truly cared about. Firenze, this madman, could disregard the Lancelot Empire's existence, but they couldn't. Emily, is what he said true? Old Han's expression was somewhat ugly as he looked at the pitiful Emily who was on the verge of tears and asked. Chapter 419. Now that things had developed to this point, it was basically impossible to conceal it. Han Sho also did not expect that such a drama would actually occur at such a crucial moment. Emily's eyes were filled with tears. Having the truth exposed in front of so many people was completely out of her expectations. At this moment, her heart was filled with bitterness, helplessness, fear, and all sorts of other emotions. This caused Emily's originally self-abased heart to be covered with cuts and bruises. Tears uncontrollably flowed down from her tender and smooth face. "It's true!" Unexpectedly, before Emily could reply, Han Shu had already coldly shouted. When everyone's gazes turned towards Han Shu released the pale-faced Phoebe's little hand and walked straight towards the tearful Emily. In front of everyone, he tightly grasped Emily's hand and slowly swept his gaze across the crowd with a gloomy face, saying, "What he said is absolutely correct. Emily is my woman. However, I was the one who painstakingly pursued her. It has nothing to do with anyone else." Old Han's face was ashen as he furiously glared at Han Shu and Emily, repeatedly saying, "Good, very good. I never thought that such a scandal would actually occur in our Betteridge family. I'm very sorry about my sister's matter. However, if anyone wants to bully my sister, they will have to see if I agree or not." One of the three heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, Emmys, after a short period of shock, resisted the urge to ask Emily the truth and said to the crowd with a sneer, "As Emily's blood brother, only the siblings knew how much Emmys doted on Emily." At this crucial moment, Emmys unhesitatingly stood beside Emily. Looking at the tearful Emily, Emmys, who was like a god of death in the eyes of the nobles of the Empire, was similarly enraged. "Brian, look at what you've done!" Sacred Sword Master Corel coldly looked at Han Shu and angrily shouted. For a moment, the crowd once again focused on Han Shu. Only now did everyone realize that the true culprit should be Han Shu. All sorts of accusing and angry gazes landed on Han Shu. In the face of the crowd's anger, Han Shu put on a gloomy face and looked at them one by one. In a deep voice he said, "This is our business. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with you. If anyone thinks that they can use their power to pressure me, let's wait and see. Brat, you have guts!" He pointed at Han Shu and said, "Leave those two girls for me right now. As long as you focus on taking care of my daughter, I can forget about what happened in the past. As long as you follow me to the southern border, no matter how chaotic Lancelot Empire is, I can guarantee that you will be safe and sound." After a pause, Firenze continued, "Otherwise, we will fight to the death. Let's see who can still laugh in the end. Father!" At this point, Fanny had a distressed expression and couldn't help but shout. Fanny also didn't expect that things would develop to this stage. However, she also couldn't control Firenze's temper. She simply didn't know when he would go crazy. Currently, Emily, Phoebe, herself, and Han Shu were all in an extremely awkward situation. Originally, it was only Han Shu's private matter, but it had been turned into a three-way meeting. Fanny naturally pushed the blame onto herself, thinking that Brian would definitely hate me now. Heavens, what should I do? Brian, now that things have come to this, aren't you going to give us an explanation? Old Han's face was ashen as he furiously glared at Han Shu. Looking at the tearful Emily, looking at the distressed Emily, and finally glancing at the terrified Phoebe, Han Shu took a deep breath. Under everyone's attentive gaze, Han Shu said in a low voice, "I have already told the three of you the ins and outs of this matter in detail. The three of you should be clear about the course of events. Now that things have come to this, I have nothing else to say. You all know how I have treated you. Here I will give you all a choice, and you all will also give yourselves a choice. If you are willing to follow me, as long as you agree, I will face any difficulties together with you. As long as you are willing to follow me, I guarantee that I will treat you well in the future and won't let anyone bully you. If you can't accept it, then consider it as me owing you all in this lifetime. Our fate in this lifetime ends here. From today onwards, we will no longer have any relationship. Brat, what kind of nonsense are you spouting? Now that things have come to this, do you still want to have women on both sides?" Firenze was furious. He lifted up his sleeves, intending to settle the score with Han Shu. Han Shu's face was gloomy. He glared at Firenze and angrily said, "None of your business. The one I want to marry isn't you. Why are you wasting so much time talking? Damn it, this stinking brat has quite a temper." No one in Lancelot Empire dares to speak to me like this. Let's see how you. Firenze loudly shouted and prepared to charge at Han Shuo. Father, I don't need you to meddle in my affairs. Fanny grabbed Firenze and shouted. I'm willing. I don't care about anything. As long as you want me, I will follow you. The tearful Emily was the first to express her stance. She was already willing to give up everything. Emily tightly grabbed onto Han Shuo's hand. Due to the force, her fingertips had sunk into his flesh. It was as though Emily wanted to use this method to gain strength and courage. Brother, I'm sorry. I love him. I'm very sorry for bringing trouble to you, but I can't leave him. Emily's tears flowed down her cheeks as she looked at Amy's. Amy's body trembled. He suddenly recalled the miserable childhood that the two of them had to depend on each other for many years. Silly girl, what are you saying these things for? No matter what, I will always stand by your side, Amy said to Emily with a doting smile on his face. As the saying goes, an elder brother is like a father. This was how Amy's felt towards Emily. Both of their parents died when they were young. It was Amy's who painstakingly brought up Emily. Everything that the two of them had today was obtained step by risking their lives. In Amy's heart, the most important person in this world was his younger sister. He married Emily to the Betteridge family, but Emily's husband died on the battlefield before they could consummate their marriage. After so many years, Emily became a widow with a hot potato. Amy's clearly understood Emily's pain all these years. He had placed all the blame on himself and had always wanted to fight for Emily's happiness. However, Emily didn't have anyone she liked. Now that the situation had developed to this point, Amy's felt that it wasn't good, but it wasn't bad either. Without thinking, he would naturally prioritize his younger sister's happiness. Thank you, big brother. Emily cried as she expressed her thanks. Soon after, she looked at old Han, who had a strange expression on his face, and continued. Father, I have been living very well in the Betteridge family all these years. I really treat you as my father. I also know that you dote on me very much, and I am very grateful to you. I know that my actions might have tarnished the Betteridge family's reputation. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me, Father. You have always been my father. Old Han's expression froze as he stared blankly at Emily. After a long while, Old Han sighed and did not say anything. With a lonely expression, he walked towards the meeting hall on the 3rd floor. I am also willing. I don't care about anything. Father, please don't meddle in my affairs. Fanny tightly grabbed onto Firenze, as if she was afraid that Firenze would be so enraged that he would throw caution to the wind. She continued in a shrill voice. If you don't promise me, I will run away from home again and make it so that you will never be able to find me again. Firenze, who had been clamoring about killing Han Shuo, was suddenly stunned. His face flushed red as he pointed at Han Shuo and cursed. What's so good about this kid? There are so many good men in the Lancelot Empire. Why do you have to be so fixated on a half-hearted fellow? For him, you actually want to run away from home? Father, you may be good at fighting, but you will never understand true love. My mother has been waiting for you her entire life, always worried that something would happen to you on the battlefield. When she was sick and on the verge of death, you were still fighting a war thousands of miles away. Even when my mother died of depression, you were not by her side. You have already destroyed her life's happiness. Don't tell me you want to destroy my happiness as well? Fanny was somewhat hysterical. Seeing Firenze break free from her hand and rush towards Han Shuo, she suddenly shrieked. Firenze, who had struggled with great difficulty to break free from Fanny's grasp, suddenly froze midway. His face was extremely distorted and his breathing was uneven. It was as if he was some kind of wild beast about to go berserk. Everyone was startled and looked at Firenze with some apprehension, fearing that he would do something crazy regardless of everything. This person's reputation had always been different from ordinary people. Therefore, everyone had reason to believe that he would go crazy. Even Han Sho was somewhat apprehensive and secretly raised his guard. He thought that if Firenze dared to recklessly attack his opponent, he would first knock him out and tie him up to prevent him from jumping up and down energetically. At that time, he would explain everything to Fanny. Under everyone's attentive gazes, Firenze's distorted face actually gradually calmed down. However, his expression was still frighteningly gloomy. After a long while, Firenze turned his head to look at Fanny. Using a calm tone for the first time in a long time, he asked Fanny, "Lass, have you really made up your mind?" Immediately nodding, Fanny's expression was resolute as she said, "Father, I have decided. Brat, can you bring Lass happiness?" Firenze fiercely glared at Han Sho and asked word by word, "As long as I am alive, no one can bully her." Han Sho raised his hand and solemnly guaranteed with a solemn expression. Chapter 420. "Father!" Fanny quietly walked to Firenze's side. Her bright eyes gazed at him as she said faintly, "Father!" Firenze stared blankly at Han Sho. After a long while, he suddenly shook his head and sighed, saying, "Fine, fine. Since you insist, I won't stop you." "Thank you, Father!" Fanny's expression was filled with joy. Soon after, she looked at Han Sho affectionately. Han Sho also heaved a sigh of relief. He nodded at Fanny and bowed to Firenze, saying, "I will bring her happiness, I promise." "Humph! You brat, you have two beauties in your arms, how can you talk about bringing her happiness? If my daughter is bullied by you, I don't care who you are, I will definitely settle the score with you." Firenze didn't treat Han Sho kindly, and shouted coldly. Han Sho smiled wryly and didn't say anything. After hesitating for a moment, he cast his gaze at Phoebe. Among the three women, Phoebe was the strongest and most independent. Now that Fanny and Emily had expressed their stand, only the pale-faced Phoebe was left. Phoebe seemed to have received quite a shock. Her originally delicate face was a little too pale. She stared blankly at Han Sho without saying a word, as if she had suddenly become stupid. Beside Phoebe, Lawrence suddenly coughed lightly and pulled the corner of Phoebe's sleeve, reminding the dazed Phoebe to stop hesitating. Phoebe suddenly came to her senses. She repeatedly struggled in her heart as she recalled the many past experiences she had with Han Sho. The ambiguous moment when they assassinated their opponent in the Buzz Merchant Guild, the sweet moment when they were escaping together, and the concern Han Sho had for her, even gifting her the divine weapon Starry Sky without hesitation. These warm memories were like a love net. When Phoebe recalled them, they wrapped tighter and tighter around her, making her feel as if she couldn't breathe. However, as a strong and independent woman, Phoebe had never thought of sharing a man with anyone. Last time, when it came to Emily, she made a great effort to understand the situation in detail. Only then did she forgive Han Sho for his outrageous actions. However, this Fanny's situation was somewhat different from that of Emily. Han Sho's attitude towards Fanny made her understand how strong the love between the two was. In addition, Fanny's birth and family background were superior to hers. Phoebe was somewhat unacceptable to her. Han Sho silently looked at Phoebe. When he saw the struggle in Phoebe's eyes, the guilt in his heart flourished. Enduring the piercing pain in his heart, Han Sho said bitterly, "Forget it, Phoebe. I've let you down for the rest of your life." When these words came out, Phoebe's eyes were suddenly filled with endless pain. Her face suddenly became as white as paper. Phoebe looked at Han Sho in disbelief. Her strong heart felt as if it had been shattered by a bayonet. Her body swayed slightly, and Phoebe actually fell backwards. Han Sho, who had been staring deeply at Phoebe, immediately paled in fright when he saw Phoebe's body sway and fall backwards. Without thinking, he flew to Phoebe's side. Before she fell, he had already supported Phoebe with one hand and cried out anxiously, "Phoebe, what's wrong with you?" A white shadow flashed by as Carell also arrived at Phoebe's side. Carell was originally preparing to support Phoebe, but Han Sho beat him to it. Corel had an anxious expression as he extended 2 fingers and placed them on Phoebe's nose. After pausing for 3 seconds, he clearly heaved a sigh of relief. He resisted the anger in his heart and said, "She fainted. It's all your fault." At this time, Han Sho didn't have the energy to bicker with Corel. When he heard Corel say that Phoebe had only fainted, his heart calmed down. Soon after, he placed his right hand on Phoebe's back and channeled his magical yuan into her. The grief-stricken Phoebe felt a warm feeling on her back. Soon after, she slowly woke up. When she opened her bright eyes and saw Han Sho's worried face, she felt all kinds of emotions surge into her heart. She could no longer pretend to be strong. Tears suddenly gushed out of her eyes like a spring and she burst out crying. Her 2 fists bombarded Han Sho's chest like raindrops. Phoebe scolded as she hit. "You heartless scoundrel, you actually dared to say such words to me. You cheated me of a lifetime of happiness, and even now you want to wash your hands of it. Do you even have a conscience?" Han Sho's chest resounded as Phoebe hit him. He had a bitter expression on his face. Looking at the sobbing Phoebe in his arms, Han Sho also felt very pained. However, at this moment, Han Sho really didn't know what to say to comfort Phoebe. He could only repeat the words, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Phoebe had never lost her composure like today. No matter what difficulties she encountered, she had never been as weak as she was today. Not to mention, there were so many elders and dignitaries here. With Phoebe's temperament, she wouldn't show the slightest bit of weakness. However, when Han Sho said, "Forget it," Phoebe felt as if the sky had collapsed. In an instant, it was as if the whole world had turned gray, without a trace of color. The piercing pain destroyed all of Phoebe's pretense, and Phoebe was beaten black and blue all over her body. Emily and Fanny's line of sight never left Han Sho. Seeing Phoebe's fists bombard Han Sho's chest, they felt very distressed. They were afraid that Phoebe would injure Han Sho indiscriminately. The expressions of the surrounding observers were all different. They didn't know what to say as they looked at the man and 3 women. They wanted to intervene in this kind of matter, but it was a pity that this kind of situation wasn't up to them. They could only watch helplessly as the situation developed in a direction that they couldn't explain at all. "That's great, that's great!" "Brian is really something." Among the crowd, Lawrence was the happiest. He was overjoyed. Han Sho and the 3 women represented 4 powers. Once they became enemies, Lawrence would have no hope of ascending the throne. During these few minutes, Lawrence felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He was more nervous than anyone else. He was really afraid that the 4 sides would recklessly cause a huge commotion and destroy all of his hopes. It wasn't until now that Phoebe was crying loudly and leaning into Han Sho's embrace that Lawrence finally let out a sigh of relief. He understood in his heart that although none of the 3 sides were satisfied with this result, because of the 3 women's insistence, none of them had the ability to change this favorable situation. "I'm sorry." Han Sho hugged Phoebe, still repeating these 3 words. Tired of hitting and scolding, Phoebe gradually calmed down the pain in her heart. She wiped the uncontrollable tears from the corners of her eyes and fiercely glared at Han Sho, saying, "Don't even think about getting rid of me in this lifetime. If you dare to do so, I'll kill you and then commit suicide. As long as you're willing to follow me, how could I bear to not want you?" Han Sho looked deeply at Phoebe and said with deep feelings, "We're already like this, how can I not follow you? You scoundrel, you heartless thing." Phoebe was filled with righteous indignation and punched Han Sho's chest again. When Phoebe said this, Carol's expression changed. He clearly understood something from Phoebe's words. Some of the people at the side were crafty old foxes. When they heard Phoebe's slip of the tongue, they instantly grasped the key point. Their eyes flickered as they looked at Han Sho and the 3 women. When Han Sho saw the gazes of those people, he immediately understood. It was rare for Han Sho to blush as he coughed dryly. Under the strange gazes of the crowd, the 3 women, Phoebe, Emily, and Fanny, gradually understood something as their faces turned red. Phoebe secretly scolded herself for being talkative, but this was not the time to explain anything. For a moment, she was bashful and did not know what to do. Because all three of his daughters had consumed the rebirth pill, their skin was equally fair and smooth, as tender as water. Among them, Emily and Phoebe, because they had been nourished by Han Shaw, faintly had a charming and mature aura. If one looked carefully, there were indeed some differences between them and Fanny. Forget it. She was the one who failed to live up to expectations and even gave her body to this brat. What else can I say? Sacred Sword Master Corell sighed in his heart. He stared blankly at Phoebe for a moment before finally saying, "Forget it, you've grown up and I can't control you." "Teacher!" Phoebe softly called out and immediately said, "I'm sorry, teacher, I've disappointed you." Cough. Space Sacred Magus Sabacas lightly coughed. Seeing that everyone was looking at him doubtfully, he smiled and said, "The matters of the young should be decided by the young themselves. Haha, we're all old, how can we restrain them for everything? Now that the Lancelot Empire is facing internal and external troubles, it's at its most difficult time. Everyone here is the backbone of the Empire. At this time, the most important thing to do is to help the Empire resolve its troubles." Sabacas was a senior of virtue and prestige in the Empire. Even that madman Firenze somewhat respected him. Now that he had spoken, everyone was resentful and didn't say anything. As the protector of the Lancelot Empire, Corell naturally wouldn't be like Firenze, who didn't care about the Empire's survival. After hearing Sabacas' words, he gradually calmed down and remained silent. Sabacas paused for a moment. Seeing that everyone was still giving him face, he heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to take the opportunity to reconcile the three parties, Han Shaw suddenly frowned and said, "Ashburn and eldest Prince Charles have personally led troops to the north of the city. It seems that they intend to settle the situation of the entire Lancelot Empire in one battle." You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.